Look, before we get into the how-to of Epictetus, before we talk about control and choice and all that good stuff, we have to talk about the world this guy actually lived in. Because I think a lot of people have this shiny, marble statue idea of Rome. You know, everyone wearing clean togas, debating logic in the sunlight, eating grapes, very civilized. Wrong. Epictetus didn't live in a library. He lived in a shark tank. He was born around 50 AD. This is the twilight of the Julio-Claudians. And if you know anything about Roman history, you know that Julio-Claudian is basically code for dysfunctional family drama with nuclear weapons. The guy in charge? Nero. Yes, that Nero. The guy who supposedly fiddled while Rome burned. This wasn't a stable political environment. It was a slasher movie. And right in the middle of this insanity sits Epictetus. But here's the kicker. He isn't just a slave. He's a slave to a slave. His master was a man named Epaphroditus, and Epaphroditus was Nero's secretary. Think about the layers of irony here. Epaphroditus was a freedman, a former slave who clawed his way up the ladder to become the right-hand man of the most dangerous psychopath in the ancient world. So, young Epictetus is growing up in the imperial court, the center of power. He sees the senators, the richest, most powerful men on earth, sweating through their tunics because Nero made a bad joke. He sees that wealth doesn't buy safety. He sees that power doesn't buy peace. He watches his master, Epaphroditus, constantly looking over his shoulder, terrified of the very emperor he serves. It's a masterclass in anxiety. Then, 68 AD hits. Nero realizes the gig is up and commits suicide. But he's too terrified to do it himself, so he forces, you guessed it, Epaphroditus to help him hold the blade. Nero dies. Chaos ensues. And we get the Year of the Four Emperors, 69 AD. It's exactly what it sounds like. 4 different guys try to seize the throne in the span of 12 months. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, they all grab the crown, and they all get murdered. Imagine turning on the news and the president has changed 3 times since breakfast. That was reality. Rome was tearing itself apart. Civil war, streets running with blood. The Capitol building literally burns down, again. Why does this matter? Why am I boring you with a history lesson? Because this is the laboratory where Stoicism was tested. This wasn't theoretical physics. Epictetus watched the most powerful men in the world rise and fall like waves. He realized that empower is a joke. It's fragile. It's external. It can be taken away by a grumpy Praetorian guard or a bad harvest. But amidst all this, the Flavian dynasty eventually takes over. Vespasian brings some order. Things calm down for a minute. During this time, Epictetus is still a slave, but he's a specific kind of slave. He wasn't swinging a pickaxe in a mine. He was likely an intellectual asset, a status symbol. In Rome, having a smart slave was like having a high-end laptop. You wanted one that could read, write, and maybe quote poetry. So he gets sent to lectures. He studies under Musonius Rufus, the Roman Socrates. This is crucial. Musonius didn't care that Epictetus was property. He cared that he had a soul. He taught him that even if your body is owned by a tyrant, your mind is a fortress that nobody can breach. Epictetus eventually gets his freedom. We don't know exactly when, but he becomes a free man, a teacher. But the universe has a sick sense of humor, because just as he starts teaching, we get Domitian, the reign of terror. If Nero was chaotic evil, Domitian was lawful evil. He insisted on being called Dominus et Deus, Master and God. He was paranoid, efficient, and absolutely hated philosophers. Why? Because philosophy asks questions. Philosophy speaks truth to power, and tyrants hate truth. Domitian had a network of informers everywhere. You could be executed for a casual comment at a dinner party. It was a surveillance state. And the Stoics, the guys talking about inner freedom and virtue, they were enemies of the state. So, in roughly 93 AD, Domitian snaps. He signs a decree and banishes all philosophers from Rome. Get out, all of you.
Epictetus, a man who spent his life in slavery, finally free, finally teaching, is kicked out of his home. He's middle-aged, he has a bum leg. Did I mention he was crippled? We'll get to that. And he's exiled to Nicopolis, a dusty little transit town in Greece. Most people would be bitter. Most people would scream at the sky. Why me? I survived Nero, I survived the civil wars, I survived slavery, and now this? But Epictetus? He probably just shrugged, packed his bags, and thought, well, Rome was getting crowded anyway.
This is the context. This is the forge. Epictetus isn't telling you to be calm because he had a spa day. He's telling you how to survive when the world is literally trying to kill you. So let's look at the manual he wrote for us. So let's talk about Epictetus. And honestly, the first thing you need to know, and this is going to sound weird, is that we don't even know his name. I'm serious. Epictetus isn't a name. It's not like Steve or Marcus. In Greek, Epictetus literally translates to acquired or gained, or if we want to be really brutal about it, property. That's it. That's the label they slapped on him.
Think about that for a second. His identity was a receipt. He walked around his entire life answering to a word that just meant, I bought this guy. It's dehumanizing in a way that's hard for us to even process today. I get upset when someone misspells my name on a coffee cup, and this guy went down in history as the thing someone bought. But here's the kicker. This man, this piece of property, became the most intellectually free human being in the Roman Empire.
Let's rewind. He was born around 50 or 55 AD in Hierapolis. That's in Phrygia, modern-day Turkey. If you've ever seen pictures of Pamukkale, those beautiful white travertine terraces with the thermal waters, yeah, that's the place. Gorgeous. But Epictetus wasn't there for the spa treatments. He was likely born into slavery, not captured in war, not kidnapped by pirates, just born. From minute one, he was an asset on a ledger. Eventually, he gets shipped off to Rome, and this is where the story gets chaotic, because he doesn't just end up in some random household. No, he ends up in the house of Epaphroditus. Now, you have to understand who Epaphroditus was. This guy was a massive deal. He was the secretary to the Emperor Nero. Yes, that Nero. The one who fiddled while Rome burned. The one who used Christians as garden torches. A genuine, certified lunatic. So Epictetus is a slave owned by Epaphroditus, who is working for the most paranoid, dangerous man on the planet. But here's the layer of irony that I absolutely love. Epaphroditus, he used to be a slave too. He was a freedman. You'd think, right? You'd think a guy who used to be a slave would be chill, maybe a little kinder. Nope. It's actually a psychological phenomenon. Sometimes the worst masters are the ones who were once mastered, because they're terrified of slipping back down the ladder. Epaphroditus was rich, powerful, and absolutely terrified of Nero. He was constantly looking over his shoulder. So you have this dynamic. Epaphroditus is the master, but he's a nervous wreck, enslaved to his ambition and his fear of the emperor. And then you have Epictetus, the actual slave, the guy who owns literally nothing, and he's watching all this.
He's observing. He's seeing that power doesn't make you free. He's watching the most powerful men in Rome trembling because Nero looked at them the wrong way at dinner. And I think this is where the seed was planted. The realization that freedom isn't about not having chains on your wrists. It's about not having chains on your mind. But Epictetus didn't just learn from observation, he learned from pain. We have to talk about the leg.
Epictetus was lame. He walked with a crutch or a limp for most of his life. Now, historians argue about this. Some say it was severe rheumatism, maybe. But the story that has survived, the one that really tells you who this guy was, is the torture story. The story goes that his master, Epaphroditus, was in a bad mood. Maybe Nero yelled at him, who knows. So he takes it out on Epictetus. He puts Epictetus's leg in a torture device, a screw or a twist of some kind, and starts cranking it. Now, most people, me included, would be screaming. We'd be begging, "Please stop, I'll do anything." Epictetus, he's just looking at him, totally calm, and he says matter-of-factly, "If you keep turning that, you're going to break it." Epaphroditus gets angry. He keeps turning. Crank. Epictetus doesn't panic. He just watches. Snap. The bone breaks. And Epictetus, presumably looking down at his shattered leg, just looks back up at his master and says, "I told you so." I mean, come on, who does that? I told you so. Not "you monster," not "why me," just a statement of fact. Cause and effect. You twist the leg breaks. Why get emotional about physics? Whether that story is 100% historically accurate or not, it captures the essence of the man. The body is just clay. It can be twisted, broken, sick, or enslaved. But the will, the thing inside that chooses how to react, that was untouchable. Epaphroditus could break the bone, but he couldn't break the composure. And that drives tyrants crazy, by the way. There is nothing more infuriating to a bullyingdom who refuses to be a victim. So Epictetus is living this brutal life, but somehow, and this is another weird quirk of history, he gets permission to study. Epaphroditus allows him to attend lectures. Maybe it was a status symbol, like, "Look at me, even my slaves are educated." Or maybe Epictetus was just so annoying with his logic that Epaphroditus said, "Go bother someone else for a few hours." He goes to study under Musonius Rufus. Musonius Rufus was the heavy hitter of Stoicism at the time. They called him the Roman Socrates. He wasn't just a professor, he was a force of nature. He believed that philosophy wasn't about parlor tricks or fancy words. It was about learning how to live. Picture the scene. You've got this lecture hall in Rome. It's filled with the sons of senators, young aristocrats in their clean white togas, smelling like expensive oils, worrying about their political careers or who they're going to marry. And sitting right there among them is Epictetus, the slave, the acquired one, probably wearing a rough tunic, maybe limp already. And Musonius Rufus didn't care. In Stoicism, the social hierarchy is fake news. It's irrelevant. Musonius taught that men and women, slaves and kings all have the same capacity for virtue. He saw potential in this crippled kid from Phrygia. It was in this classroom that Epictetus realized the ultimate truth that defines his Enchiridion and Discourses. He realized that while Epaphroditus owned his body, nobody owned his assent. He realized that he was already free. He looked around at those rich kids, stressing out about their reputations, and he realized they were the slaves. They were slaves to public opinion, slaves to their desires, slaves to their fears. Epictetus had nothing to lose, literally, and that made him invincible. It's a powerful idea, isn't it? We spend so much time trying to control the outside world. We try to control our boss, the traffic, the stock market, what people say about us on Twitter, and we're miserable because we can't control any of it. Epictetus learned the hard way, the hardest way possible, that the only thing you truly own is your character. So by the time Nero dies and the regime changes, Epictetus isn't just a learned slave. He's a weapon of mass instruction waiting to happen. He's forged in fire. But he's still a slave, at least for a little while longer. And looking back at his early life, I think that name, Epictetus, the acquired one, it fits. Not because he was property, but because he acquired wisdom. He earned it. He paid for it in pain and patience. And what he has to say to us, well, it's going to hurt a little bit, but it's the kind of pain that sets a broken bone so it can heal straight. Ready to hear what he learned?
The origins of the acquired one. Let's start with the name, or to be precise, the lack of one. We call him Epictetus. You see that name on books, on quotes over sunsets on Instagram, on busts in museums. But Epictetus isn't a name, it's a description. It's Greek for acquired or gained. Think about that. His mother gave birth to him in Hierapolis, in Phrygia, and almost immediately his identity was stripped away. He was sold. He became an asset on a ledger. Imagine walking around your whole life and your legal name is essentially receipt or property. It sets a tone, doesn't it? It tells you exactly where you stand in the grand hierarchy of the universe, at the bottom. He shipped off to Rome, the center of the world, the belly of the beast. But he doesn't arrive as a tourist. He arrives as a commodity, a thing. And this is crucial, because if you want to understand why this man became the most indestructible mind in history, you have to understand that he started with absolutely nothing, not even personhood. The master, Epaphroditus. So who acquired him? Enter Epaphroditus. Now here is where history gets a little bit hilarious and a whole lot tragic. Epaphroditus was wealthy, powerful. He was the administrative secretary to Emperor Nero, meaning he was the guy handling the paperwork for a literal sociopath. But here's the kicker. Epaphroditus, he used to be a slave. He was a freedman. You'd think, wouldn't you? You'd think a guy who had worn chains would be a little kinder to the next guy wearing them. You'd hope for some empathy. But no, that's not how human psychology works, sadly. Often the abused become the abusers. Epaphroditus wasn't a mentor. He was a tyrant. He was desperate to prove his power, paranoid, living in Nero's court where people were executed for looking at the emperor sideways. It's a chaotic environment. Purges, screaming, absolute power corrupted absolutely. And in the middle of this shark tank sits Epictetus, the acquired one, watching, just watching, and realizing the greatest irony of his life. The master, Epaphroditus, was a nervous wreck, terrified of Nero, terrified of losing his money, terrified of losing his status. The slave was calm. The master was a slave to his own fear. Who's really the free man here? The trial of the body, the broken leg incident. Now, we have to talk about the leg. If you know one story about Epictetus, it's probably this one. And if you don't, brace yourself. The legend goes that Epaphroditus, in a fit of rage or maybe just boredom, rich Romans were weird, starts twisting Epictetus's leg. He's putting it in a torture device. Most people would scream, beg, plead, "I'll be good, stop, please." Epictetus just looks at him, calm as a morning lake. He says, "If you keep doing that, you will break it." Not a threat, just a fact. Like saying, if it rains, you get wet. Epaphroditus keeps twisting. Snap. The bone breaks. Epictetus doesn't scream. He doesn't cry. He just looks at the dangling limb, looks back at his master, and says, "Did I not tell you it would break?" Now, look,
Historians love to ruin good stories. Some say he didn't have his leg broken by a master. They say he had severe rheumatism or arthritis. But honestly, who cares? The point isn't the forensics of the fracture. The point is the reaction. He spent the rest of his life with a limp. Every step he took was a reminder of pain, a reminder that his body belonged to someone else. But that moment, that did I not tell you? That was the moment he decided that pain is mandatory, but suffering is optional. Awakening the inner citadel, mental freedom. This is the birth of the dichotomy of control. See, most of us invent coping mechanisms to deal with traffic or a bad boss. Epictetus invented a philosophy to survive hell. He realized a fundamental truth that most of us spend our whole lives running away from. You can own my leg. You can own my bank account. You can own my reputation. But you cannot touch my will, my prohairesis. He stopped viewing Epaphroditus as a monster. That gives the monster too much credit. He started viewing him as a personal trainer, a very aggressive, non-consensual gymnastic trainer for the soul. Oh, you want to torture me? Okay, let's see if I can maintain my character while you do it. It's a power move. It's the ultimate rebellion. You can put me in chains, but if I don't care about the chains, am I really a zen? Education and chains. Musonius Rufus. It wasn't always just manual labor. Sometimes, if you were a smart slave, you were like a high-end laptop. You were more valuable if you were educated. So Epictetus gets permission to attend lectures. He goes to see Musonius Rufus. Musonius was the rock star of Stoicism at the time, the Roman Socrates. Picture the scene. You've got aristocrats, senators' sons, wearing fine purple-bordered togas, and in the back, Epictetus, limping, wearing a tunic that's probably seen better days. But when Musonius Rufus spoke about endurance, about ethics, about how rank means nothing and character means everything, the rich kids were probably checking their sundials, wondering when lunch was. Epictetus was drinking it in. It was oxygen to him. He learned that philosophy wasn't about word games, it was a weapon. Musonius taught him that a king can be a slave to his lusts, and a prisoner can be a king of his mind. Eventually, the wheel turned. Nero fell, suicide, chaos, the usual dictator exit strategy. Epaphroditus fell out of favor, and eventually got executed by a later emperor because karma is real. But somewhere in that transition, Epictetus was manumitted. He was granted freedom. He walked out of that house. He was middle-aged, he was poor, he was permanently disabled, he had no family, he had no career in the modern sense. But he walked out with something nobody else in Rome had. He had a mind that had been forged in fire. He had tested his philosophy not in a classroom, but in a torture chamber, and it held up. He was finally legally free, but he'd tell you he had been free long before they signed the papers. So let's talk about Rome. First century Rome, not the white marble fantasy you see in movies. I'm talking about the real Rome. It was loud, it smelled like unwashed bodies and roasting meat. It was a glorious, terrifying mess. And into this meat grinder walks a kid from Hierapolis, Epictetus. Well, actually, not Epictetus. We don't even know his real name. Epictetus just means acquired, like a receipt, the acquired one. Imagine that. Your entire identity is just property. He's a nobody, a slave, just another piece of furniture with a pulse, dragged all the way from modern-day Turkey to the center of the universe. And who bought him? This is where it gets good. He lands in the household of a guy named Epaphroditus. Now, Epaphroditus wasn't just some random rich guy. He was the secretary, a libellus, to Emperor Nero. That means he handled petitions.
He was the gatekeeper. Powerful? Absolutely. Wealthy? Obscenely so.
But here's the joke, the cosmic joke that I think Epictetus started laughing at early on. Epaphroditus was a freedman. He used to be a slave himself. You'd think he'd be nice, right? You'd think he'd have some empathy? No, of course not. Because hurt people, and terrified people terrify people, and Epaphroditus was terrified.
Why? Because his boss was Nero. You know Nero, the guy who supposedly fiddled while Rome burned? Yeah, that guy. Working for Nero was like juggling chainsaws while blindfolded. One wrong look, one bad mood, and you're dead. So Epictetus is watching this. He's the slave, right? He's the one in chains. But he looks at his master, Epaphroditus, this powerful, rich man, and sees a nervous wreck. Epaphroditus is sweating through his toga every day, terrified of losing his status, terrified of the emperor, terrified of death. Epictetus realizes something profound here. My master is a slave. He's a slave to fear, a slave to ambition, a slave to a psychopath in a purple robe. And in the middle of this high-stakes nightmare, we get the leg. You know the story. You have to know the story. It's the defining myth of Epictetus. The story goes that Epaphroditus, in a fit of rage, or maybe just bored cruelty, which is worse, starts twisting Epictetus's leg, just torquing it. Epictetus doesn't scream, he doesn't beg, he just looks at him, calm as a cucumber, and says, "You know, if you keep doing that, you're going to break it." Snap. Epictetus looks down at his mangled leg, looks back up at his master, and says, "I told you so." I mean, come on, that is the hardest thing anyone has ever done. Ever. Now look, historians love to ruin the fun. Some say, oh, maybe it was just bad arthritis, or maybe it was rheumatism. Who cares? It doesn't matter if it was torture or disease. The point is the limp. He spent the rest of his life hobbling around on a crutch. Most people would be bitter. I'd be bitter. I'd be writing angry reviews on Yelp about it. But for Epictetus, that broken leg was a diploma. It was physical proof of his biggest idea. The body is not yours. You can't control it. It can be broken by a master, by a disease, by a bus. If you tie your happiness to your leg working perfectly, you're going to be miserable. So he just let it go. But it wasn't all torture and gloom. Rome was weird. It had this strange intellectual culture where owning a philosopher was like owning a really expensive handbag. It was a status symbol. So Epaphroditus lets Epictetus go to class. He sends him to study under Musonius Rufus, the Roman Socrates. This guy was the real deal. He didn't care that Epictetus was a slave. In the classroom, the hierarchy of Rome dissolved. You had senators' sons sitting next to the acquired one. Rufus taught him that philosophy isn't about using big words to sound smart at parties. It's about surgery. It's about cutting the rot out of your soul. He taught Epictetus that there is no male or female in virtue, no slave or free in wisdom, just rational beings and irrational idiots. And Epictetus soaked it up. He took the theory from Rufus and applied it to the madness he saw at home in Nero's court. He saw the most powerful men in the world trembling. He saw them exile each other, kill each other, betray each other, all for things that could be taken away in a second. He watched his own master, Epaphroditus, help Nero commit suicide, only to later be executed by the Emperor Domitian for helping Nero commit suicide. You can't win. The game is rigged. Epictetus saw that the only way to win was to stop playing their game. Eventually, he gets manumitted. He becomes a libertus, a freedman. We don't know exactly when, probably after Nero kicked the bucket. But here's the kicker. I don't think he even cared. Legal freedom? Paperwork. Big deal. He had already freed himself years ago, while his leg was being smashed, while he was serving drinks to monsters. He realized that freedom isn't a legal status.
It's a mental fortress. So he walks out of slavery, grabs his crutch, and steps into the world, not as a victim, but as the only free man in an empire of slaves.
Let's be honest. If you were a slave in ancient Rome, attending a philosophy lecture was probably not on your bingo card. You were worried about survival. You were worried about avoiding a beating. But here we have Epictetus, a slave. And not just any slave. He belonged to Epaphroditus. Now, Epaphroditus was Nero's secretary. If you know anything about Nero, you know that being anywhere near his inner circle was like juggling chainsaws while blindfolded. It was chaotic, dangerous. And yet, in the middle of this imperial madness, Epictetus is allowed to go to school. Why? Was Epaphroditus a benevolent guy? A secret lover of wisdom? He was. A climber. In Rome, having a philosopher slave was the ultimate flex. It's like a tech billionaire today buying a first edition copy of Infinite Jest to put on a shelf they never look at. It signals, I am cultured. I own wisdom. So Epaphroditus let his limping slave wander off to lectures, probably thinking, hey, this makes me look good. He had no idea he was accidentally funding the education of one of history's greatest minds. He was creating a monster, a benevolent, stoic monster. So Epictetus walks into the lecture hall, and who is standing there? Musonius Rufus. We need to talk about Rufus. History calls him the Roman Socrates, which is a nice compliment, but I think it undersells him. He wasn't some dusty academic hiding in an ivory tower. He was a practitioner. He was the guy who looked the most powerful people in the world in the eye and told them they were acting like children. And he paid for it. He got exiled a lot. Nero didn't like him, the regime hated him, because Rufus had this radical idea that philosophy wasn't a hobby. It wasn't something you did on the weekends. It was life and death. He had these wildly progressive views for a Roman guy. He thought women should study philosophy. He thought marriage was a partnership of equals. He thought, get this, that slaves were human beings capable of virtue. You can imagine Epictetus sitting in the back, hearing this. A kid who legally counts as property, hearing the most respected teacher in Rome say, actually, your soul is free. Your status is irrelevant. That must have felt like a lightning strike. But don't get it twisted. Rufus wasn't running a daycare. He wasn't there to make you feel good about yourself. He had this famous line that Epictetus never forgot. He said, the philosopher's school is a hospital. A hospital. You don't go to a hospital to have a party. You go because you're broken. You go because you're sick. Rufus would say, if you leave my lecture feeling happy, I failed. You should leave in pain. He meant that if you aren't realizing how messed up your priorities are, how greedy, how anxious, how petty you've been, then you aren't learning. Real change hurts. It's surgery for the soul. He hated applause. He despised it. If he gave a speech and the crowd cheered, he'd get annoyed. He'd say, if you have time to praise me, I am speaking to no purpose. He wanted silence. He wanted you to be so stunned by the truth that you couldn't clap. He wanted you to walk out of that room staring at your feet, wondering how you'd wasted so much of your life chasing nonsense. Pedagogy and teaching style. Brutally. He used the Socratic method, but not the gentle kind. He used logic as a trap. He would ask you a question, then another, and another, until you admitted that you didn't actually know what good was, until you admitted that you were afraid of things that couldn't hurt you. He called this confrontational compassion. There's a story Epictetus tells later. Rufus sees a student who's upset about something trivial. Maybe he lost some money or someone insulted him. And Rufus doesn't comfort him. He challenges him. He basically asks, did you think life was going to be easy? Did you think the world owed you comfort? He taught logic, but not so you could win debates at dinner parties. He taught logic so you wouldn't be tricked by your own mind. He wanted to stop you from lying to yourself. This is where Epictetus learned the concept of askesis, practical training. It's not enough to know the definition of courage. You have to practice it. You have to train your desires the way an athlete trains their muscles.
And through all this tough love, Epictetus picked up the jewels that would define his entire life. He learned that slavery was just a circumstance. It touched his body. His leg was lame, his freedom was restricted, but it couldn't touch his prohairesis, his moral choice. Rufus taught him that he had a God within, a spark of divinity that no emperor could extinguish. That's where bear and forbear comes from. It wasn't a catchy slogan, it was a survival strategy. Endure what you can't change, control what you can.
Epictetus worshipped the guy. In his own books, years later, he just calls him the master, or Rufus. You can hear the reverence. He didn't just learn from him, he became him. When Epictetus finally got his freedom and started teaching, he didn't invent a new style. He just cranked up the volume on Rufus's style. The directness, that's Rufus. The humor, that's Rufus. The refusal to coddle students, that is absolutely Rufus. Musonius Rufus is mostly forgotten by the general public today. We don't have many of his writings, but we have Epictetus. And in a way, every time we read Epictetus, we're actually hearing the echoes of that lecture hall in Rome, where a slave sat in the back, listening to a teacher who told him he was free. So let's talk about freedom. And I don't mean the kind where you finally pay off your student loans or get to leave the office at 4:59 p.m. on a Friday. I'm talking about the year 68 AD. Nero is dead. Suicide, messy affair. And Rome is basically a dumpster fire of civil war. In the middle of this chaos, our guy, Epictetus, gets manumitted. That's the fancy Roman legal term for his master finally let him go. Epaphroditus, the guy who owned him, and yes, the same guy who served Nero, signed the papers. Epictetus is now a libertinus, a freedman. Now, pause for a second. You'd think the first thing he'd do is run, get as far away from the Palatine Hill and the memories of torture and leg-breaking as possible, right? Maybe buy a little villa by the coast, drink wine and complain about the weather. That's what I would do. That's what any sane person would do. But Epictetus? No, he stays. He stays right there in the belly of the beast, Rome. The noise, the smell, the politicians stabbing each other in the back. He looks at all of it and goes, "This looks like a great place to start a school." See, freedom for him wasn't just a legal status. It wasn't just having the paperwork that said, "I own myself." He realized that being a libertinus in Rome was a weird limbo. You weren't a slave, but you weren't fully elite either. You are in the gray area. And Epictetus loved the gray area. It meant he was invisible enough to observe, but free enough to speak. He decides to pursue a life of poverty, voluntary poverty. I know. We spend our whole lives trying to avoid being broke, and this guy dives headfirst into it. But you have to understand the logic. He figured, if I have nothing, nobody can take anything from me. It's the ultimate power move. You can't rob a guy who's sleeping on a straw mat and owns one lamp. Actually, someone did steal his lamp later. He just bought a cheaper clay one and laughed about it. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So he needs a teacher. Enter Musonius Rufus. If Epictetus is the grandfather of Stoicism, Rufus is the terrifying great-uncle who yells at you for eating too much cheese. Rufus wasn't just a philosopher, he was a Roman knight, practical, hard-nosed. He preached that philosophy wasn't a parlor trick, it was medicine, and medicine is supposed to taste bad.
He's the one who taught Epictetus that gender didn't matter when it came to virtue, which, let me tell you, was a pretty wild take for first-century Rome. Rufus believed women had the same capacity for reason as men. Revolutionary stuff.
But mostly, Rufus taught Epictetus the Socratic method, which is basically just the art of asking questions until the other person realizes they're an idiot. Epictetus absorbed this. He soaked it up. He learned that endurance isn't just gritting your teeth, it's reframing the problem. Rufus would say things like, if you have a headache, don't say, alas, my head. Just say, I have a headache. Stop adding the drama. Stop adding the alas.
Armed with this grit, Epictetus hits the streets. He starts teaching. But he doesn't rent a lecture hall. He doesn't have tenure. He doesn't publish papers. In fact, he never wrote a single word down. Everything we know about him comes from his students taking notes. Why? Because writing is for people who want to be remembered. Epictetus wanted to be heard. He wanted to grab you by the shoulders and shake the nonsense out of you right then and there. He sets up shop in public spaces, maybe the corners of the forum, and look at who is listening. It's not just other poor people. It's the sons of senators. It's future politicians. It's the rich kids of Rome. Picture the irony. You have a former slave walking with a limp, wearing a rough cloak, lecturing the masters of the universe about what it means to be truly free. He's telling guys who own 50 estates that they are actually slaves because they're addicted to praise, or fear, or money.
He taught them the art of living. He broke it down into 3 areas: logic, physics, and ethics. But don't let the academic terms bore you. Logic was, stop lying to yourself. Physics was, understand how the world actually works so you stop crying when it rains. Ethics was, how to treat people even when they're annoying. It was practical, it was visceral, and it was dangerous. Because the political climate, it was shifting. We're in the Flavian dynasty now. And then along comes Emperor Domitian. Domitian, the bald Nero. This guy, well, let's just say he had some insecurity issues. He was paranoid, authoritarian, and absolutely hated anyone who looked like they might be thinking for themselves. And who does that sound like? The Stoics.
This is where the Stoic opposition comes in. This was a group of senators and thinkers, people like Epictetus and Helvidius Priscus, who kept standing up to the emperors, not with swords, but with moral stubbornness. They were annoying. They wouldn't clap when the emperor told a bad joke. They wouldn't vote for the laws that stripped people of rights. Domitian looked at these Stoics and didn't see philosophers. He saw a threat. He saw a virus. He started thinking, why are these people not afraid of me? I have the legions. I have the lions. I can have them killed before breakfast. Why do they look at me with that calm, judging stare? And Epictetus? He wasn't keeping his head down. He was critiquing tyrants openly, not by naming Domitian, he wasn't suicidal, but by talking about the nature of tyranny. He'd say things like, the tyrant can cut off my head, but he cannot harm my character. Imagine saying that in a city where heads were literally rolling. He told his students that Caesar can give you peace from war, sure, but Caesar can't give you peace from sorrow. Caesar can't stop you from being jealous. Only reason can do that. He was essentially telling the youth of Rome that the emperor had no real power, that the emperor was just a guy in a purple dress playing a role in a play, and a bad actor at that. Domitian eventually snapped. The paranoia boiled over. He executes Aurelius Rusticus. Why? Because Rusticus wrote a biography praising a Stoic martyr. That was it. Writing a biography got you killed. Then he kills Herennius Seneca. The message was clear. The brainy guys have got to go. And then came the Great Banishment. Around 93 or 94 AD, Domitian issues an edict, a decree. All philosophers, every single one of them, are to be expelled from Rome and Italy. Get out, all of you. Take your beards, take your logic, and get the hell out of my city.
Now, imagine the panic. You're a philosopher in Rome. You've built a life, maybe you have a little school. Suddenly, you're an enemy of the state. Most people would be weeping, gnashing their teeth, begging for mercy. But this was Epictetus's final exam. This was the moment where he had to prove that all the stuff he'd been talking about wasn't just hot air.
You can almost see him packing his bag. He's got his clay lamp, he's got his cloak. He looks around at the chaos, the other intellectuals scrambling and crying, and he's calm. Why? Because he had already accepted that location is an indifferent. Rome is just a pile of rocks. Nicopolis is a pile of rocks. Athens is a pile of rocks. Your happiness doesn't depend on your zip code.
He didn't view the banishment as a tragedy. He viewed it as a reassignment. God, or the universe, or nature, was signaling that his time in Rome was done. The class was dismissed. He didn't beg Domitian. He didn't write a groveling letter. He just left. He headed for Nicopolis in Greece, a dusty little transit town, not a cultural hub. It wasn't Athens. It was barely on the map. But that's exactly why he liked it. He wasn't going there to retire. He was going there to build the Harvard of Stoicism. He was going to turn that dusty town into a hospital for the soul.
But as he walked out of the gates of Rome, leaving behind the only freedom he had legally known, he must have smiled, because Domitian thought he was punishing him. Domitian thought he was ruining his life. But you can't ruin the life of a man who wants nothing. You can't banish a man who is at home in his own mind. Epictetus was leaving Rome, but he was taking his freedom with him. And that, my friends, is the ultimate flex.
Let's talk about the bad guy. Every good story needs a villain, right? And Epictetus had a terrifying one. You might think your boss is a micromanager. You might think the government is intrusive. But you have no idea what it was like to live in Rome under Emperor Domitian. We are talking about the years 81 to 96 AD. This wasn't the glory days of Augustus. This was a nightmare. Domitian wasn't just a ruler. He was a paranoid, insecure narcissist with an army at his disposal. See, before him, emperors were powerful, sure, but they maintained a polite fiction that they were just first among equals. Not Domitian. He looked around and said, "You know what? I'm done pretending." He demanded to be addressed as Dominus et Deus, Master and God. Imagine the fragility of an edict that requires you to call him God to his face just to survive a meeting. And because he was insecure, which all tyrants are, he saw enemies everywhere. Rome became a city of whispers. He encouraged the rise of delatores, informants, snitches. Your neighbor, your slave, your brother, if they heard you make a joke about the emperor's bald spot, they could report you. You'd be dead by noon. They'd get a cut of your estate. It was an atmosphere of absolute terror. Now, enter the Stoics. You'd think a bunch of guys sitting around talking about virtue and logic would be boring, right? Harmless? Wrong. To a tyrant like Domitian, Stoicism wasn't a philosophy. It was a political threat. It was the opposition. Why? Because Stoicism teaches you that you are free. It teaches you that no matter what the guy in the big chair says, he can't control your mind. He can't force you to compromise your morals. He can hurt your body, but he can't touch you. Domitian looked at these Stoics, people who refused to flatter him, refused to tremble when he yelled, and he didn't see philosophers. He saw rebels. He wasn't entirely wrong. Epictetus came from a lineage of troublemakers. His own teacher, Musonius Rufus, had been exiled. They were part of what history calls the Stoic opposition. They were the intellectual heirs of men like Epaphroditus, who walked out of the Senate rather than applaud a murderer. So the tension is building. You have the immovable object, Epictetus and his crew, and the unstoppable force of Domitian's paranoia. Then comes the year 93 AD, the catalyst. Domitian snaps. He starts executing people. He kills Arulenus Rusticus and Herennius Senecio. Their crime? Did they try to assassinate him? No. Did they start a coup? No. They wrote biographies. They wrote eulogies praising those old Stoic martyrs who had stood up to previous emperors. That's it. That was the crime. Praising brave men. But in a dictatorship, memory is treason. If you remember that people used to be free, you are dangerous. So Domitian had them killed, and he burned their books in the forum. Epictetus was right there. He was close to these men. He was in the splash zone. It was guilt by association. If you were a philosopher in Rome in 93 AD, you had a target on your back. So Domitian makes a move. He issues a Sunatus Consultum, a decree. He doesn't just go after a few individuals. He decides to flush the toilet. He bans all philosophers, not just from the city of Rome, but from the entire Italian peninsula. Get out, all of you. His rationale was simple. He wanted to cleanse the state. He thought if he got rid of the people who taught critical thinking, everyone else would settle down and be good little subjects. It's actually kind of a compliment if you think about it. The most powerful man in the world was afraid of a few lectures. So what does Epictetus do? This is the moment. This is where the rubber meets the road. Most people would panic. I mean, imagine being told you have to leave your home, your job, your life right now, or you die. You'd cry, you'd beg, you'd post an angry rant on social media. Epictetus? He just applied his own lectures. He looked at the situation and said, "Is this under my control? No. The emperor controls the borders. I control my reaction." There's this famous vibe about him during this time. While others were weeping and gnashing their teeth, Epictetus was calm, almost bored. He viewed exile as an indifferent. It wasn't good, it wasn't bad. It was just geography. "You are banning me from Rome?" he might have said. "Fine, I was getting tired of the noise anyway." He didn't fight it. He didn't grovel. He packed his meager belongings, probably just his lamp and a few scrolls, and he walked. He went to Nicopolis in Greece, a dusty little transit town. And here is the beautiful irony of history. Domitian exiled Epictetus to silence him. He wanted to make him irrelevant. But by forcing him to move to Nicopolis, Domitian inadvertently helped Epictetus found the school that would make him immortal. It was there, in exile, that his greatest lectures were recorded. Domitian tried to bury him, but he didn't realize Epictetus was a seed. So picture the scene. It's roughly 93 AD. Rome is a mess. Emperor Domitian is running the show, and let me tell you, the man has skin thinner than a grape. He's paranoid, insecure, and who does an insecure tyrant hate the most? Philosophers. Why? Because philosophers, specifically the Stoics, had this annoying habit of speaking truth to power. They were the Stoic martyrs. They kept looking at the emperor and saying, "Hey, maybe don't murder people." Domitian didn't like that. He saw intellect as a threat. So he snaps. He issues the Edict of Expulsion. He basically says, every philosopher in Italy, get out, now. Boom, evicted. Now, most people would panic. They'd beg, they'd hide, but Epictetus, I like to think he just grabbed his crutch, shrugged, and said, "Fine, I didn't like the rent here anyway. He leaves, and this is the moment. This is the catalyst. If he stays in Rome, he's just another voice in the noise. By getting kicked out, he gets forced to build his own kingdom. The strategic location. Why Nicopolis? He has to go somewhere. The obvious choice is Athens, right? That's where the cool kids are. The Ivy League, that's where you go if you want to wear a fancy robe and debate the metaphysical properties of a table.
Epictetus doesn't go to Athens. He goes to Nicopolis. Why? Nicopolis is in western Greece. It's not a college town. It's a transit hub. It's a gritty, bustling city founded by Augustus to celebrate a war victory. But more importantly, geographically, it's a choke point. If you are traveling from Rome to the east, or the east to Rome, you have to go through Nicopolis. It was brilliant.
He didn't want to hide in an ivory tower. He set up shop right in the middle of the traffic. He positioned himself where the high-ranking officials, the exhausted travelers, and the young aristocrats had to stop. He wanted real people with real problems. He chose a factory town over a university town. That tells you everything you need to know about his philosophy. It wasn't for the classroom, it was for the street. So he sets up this school, but don't picture a grand lecture hall with marble columns. It was a room, probably dusty, probably hot. And the vibe? It wasn't, welcome, let's explore the cosmos. Epictetus called his school a healing place, a hospital for souls. He famously told his students, you shouldn't walk out of here laughing. You should walk out in pain. Because if you're coming to him, you're sick. You're addicted to status. You're terrified of death. You're anxious about money. You are spiritually ill. And he's the surgeon. And surgery hurts. The routine was simple but brutal. Mornings were for the heavy lifting, reading the old Stoic texts, breaking down logic. But the afternoons, that was the good stuff. The discussions, the open door policy. Random people would wander in, governors, soldiers, lost tourists, and Epictetus would just dissect their lives, publicly. It was chaotic, it was raw, it was beautiful. The curriculum, the 3 topoi. Now, what did he actually teach? He didn't care if you knew how the universe was made. He didn't care about the physics of a star. He cared about 3 things, the 3 topoi. First, the discipline of assent, which is fancy talk for stop believing your own nonsense. It's logic, but applied logic, how not to get fooled by your initial impressions. Second, the discipline of desire. This is the big one. Physics and theology wrapped into one hard pill to swallow. Accept what happens. Love the inevitable. Stop screaming at the rain. And third, the discipline of action. Ethics. How do you treat your brother, your father, the guy who just stole your wallet? He put ethics above everything. He famously said, "Show me a Stoic. I want to see one." He was sick of people who could quote the books but lived like jerks. He wanted to know, can you actually do it? The student body. Who were these people signing up for this abuse? Mostly young Roman aristocrats, the sons of the elite. These kids were heading into politics, into the meat grinder of the Roman Empire, and they needed armor. They needed to learn how to be powerful without losing their minds. And we had some heavy hitters. Flavius Arrian was there. We'll get to him in a second. Even Emperor Hadrian, the most powerful man in the world, was rumored to have visited. Imagine that dynamic. You have the Emperor of Rome, and you have a crippled ex-slave. And the emperor is listening to the ex-slave. That is power. Epictetus used Socratic questioning. He didn't give lectures, he gave interrogations. He'd corner you, he'd use tough love, he'd make you look like an idiot to show you that you were acting like an idiot, and they loved him for it. The recording of the legacy, Arrian's role. Now, here is a terrifying thought. Epictetus wrote nothing. Zero. Not a word. If it weren't for this one student, Arrian, Epictetus would just be a footnote in history, a rumor. Arrian was a young man, sharp, probably a bit obsessive. He sat in these lectures and he realized this is gold, so he started taking shorthand notes, hyponyma. He wasn't writing a book, he was basically live tweeting the lectures. That's why the discourses feel so disjointed and aggressive. They aren't polished essays. They are transcripts of a man yelling at his students. You can hear the voice. You can hear the sarcasm. Later, Arrian compiled the Enchiridion, the handbook, the greatest hits album, a little manual you could carry in your pocket or under your toga, so when life punched you in the face, you had a guide ready. But what about the man himself? He lived what he preached, and I mean really lived it. He lived alone, no wife, no kids at first. He had almost no possessions. There's this famous story, the iron lamp. He had this iron lamp in his house. It was probably the most valuable thing he owned. One night, he hears a noise. He goes to check. The lamp is gone, stolen.
Now, you or I, we'd call the police. We'd be furious. My lamp, that was mine. Epictetus, he just said, well, he thought he could steal a lamp, but he can only steal what I possess. He can't steal my character. And then, and I love this, he said, tomorrow, I'll just buy a clay one. End of story. No drama, just buy a cheaper lamp.
But he wasn't a stone. He wasn't cold. Late in life, a friend of his was going to expose a baby, leave it to die because he couldn't afford it. Epictetus, the bachelor, the hermit, took the kid in. He hired a nurse. He raised the child. He broke his own solitude to save a life. That's the discipline of action in practice.
The final years and reputation. By the end, he was a rock star. He became the most respected philosopher in the Roman world. People compared him to Socrates, which is the highest compliment you can get in that game. Because, like Socrates, he didn't just talk, he was the philosophy. He died around 135 AD in Nicopolis. He left behind the clay lamp, and he left behind the notes Arrian took. And that was it. He didn't build a monument, he didn't build a massive library, he built men, he built minds. And because of that, 2,000 years later, we are still sitting here talking about the crippled slave who set up shop at a bus stop in Greece. Not bad for an exile. Here is the thing. We are all control freaks, every single one of us. I spent 45 minutes this morning yelling at my toaster because it burnt my bagel. I have spent entire weeks rehearsing arguments in the shower with people who aren't even in the same zip code as me. We obsess over traffic, over the stock market, over whether that cute barista actually smiled or just had gas. We run around trying to micromanage the universe, and then we wonder why we're exhausted, why we're anxious, why we feel like deep down we're losing. Epictetus looked at this mess, this human condition of trying to wrestle reality into submission, and he gave us the only tool we actually need, the dichotomy of control, or if you want the fancy Greek, the distinction between ta ephemen and ta uk ephemen, what is up to us and what is not up to us.
It sounds simple, almost stupidly simple, but I promise you, confusing these two lists is the root of every single bad day you have ever had. Let's start with the hard part, the not up to us pile. Epictetus is brutal here. He takes everything we care about, everything we put on our vision boards, and throws it in the trash. Your body, not up to you. You can eat kale and do burpees until you puke, but a virus, a car accident, or just plain old genetics can wreck you in a second. Your property, not up to you.
The market crashes, the thief breaks in, the house burns down. Reputation? Oh, please. You can be a saint and people will still hate you because they don't like your face. Political office, your career, whether you get the promotion, whether it rains on your wedding day, none of it. It's all external. It's all indifferent.
And here is the punchline. If you try to control these things, you are a slave. I don't mean that metaphorically. Epictetus was an actual slave for part of his life. He walked with a limp because his master reportedly twisted his leg until it snapped. He knew what slavery was. And he looked at free men, rich men, emperors, and saw them terrified of losing their money or their status. He called them the real slaves, because if your happiness depends on something someone else can take away, you belong to them. So what's left? If we can't control our bodies, our bank accounts, or our reputations, what do we actually own? It's a very short list. Your opinions, your impulses, your desires, your aversions. That's it. That is the whole kingdom. You control the judgments you make about the world. You don't control the event. You control the story you tell yourself about the event. You control whether you assent to the idea that this is terrible, or whether you pause and say, no, this is just a thing that happened.
Think of it like an archer. This is my favorite image from Stoicism. You are the archer. You control the training. You control the quality of the bow. You control your focus, your breath, the pullback, and the moment you let the string go. But the second that arrow leaves the string, it's gone. A gust of wind might hit it, the target might move, a bird might fly in the way.
Most of us release the arrow and then scream at the wind. We tie our self-worth to whether we hit the bullseye. Epictetus says, no, the hit is external. The aim is internal. If you aim well and miss, you still won. If you aim poorly and get lucky, you still lost. This shifts everything. It turns life from a horror movie into a stage play. Epictetus says we are actors. The playwright, nature, God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, hands you a script. Maybe you're the king, maybe you're the beggar. Maybe you have a monologue, maybe you have one line, and then you die. You don't get to choose the role. You don't get to choose how long the play is. Your only job is to play the role well. If you're the beggar and you spend the whole play crying that you aren't the king, you're a bad actor. You ruined the performance. But if you play the beggar with dignity, with grace, that is excellence. That is freedom. So how do we actually do this without becoming emotionless robots? Because I know what you're thinking. So I just shouldn't care if my family dies or I go broke? No, you care, but you care with a caveat. The Stoics had this technique called the reserve clause, hypexeresis. It's a mental safety valve. You don't say, I will drive to the store. You say, I will drive to the store, fate permitting. You don't say, I will crush this presentation. You say, I will do my absolute best on this presentation, assuming nothing stops me. It sounds pessimistic, but it's actually incredibly liberating. It keeps the door open. It acknowledges that the universe gets a vote. When things go wrong, and they will go wrong, you aren't crushed. You just nod and say, I see. The arrow missed. The wind blew. Okay, what's my next move? That is the discipline. Every time you feel your chest tighten, every time you feel that spike of anger or fear, you have to stop. You have to look at the thing upsetting you, the traffic, the rude email, the lost wallet, and ask the only question that matters. Is this up to me? If the answer is no, you have to practice the hardest sentence in the English language. Then it is nothing to me. Not that it doesn't exist, not that you don't deal with it, but that it cannot touch your character. It cannot break your mind. It is just stuff. And you You are the one who decides what to do with the stuff. Let's get real for a second. Most of us are miserable. I know, you're doing fine. But are you? Because I look at my own life, the traffic, the Wi-Fi cutting out, the guy who looked at me weird on the subway, and I realize I am constantly losing my mind over things I cannot touch, move, or change. We are all control freaks in a universe that refuses to be controlled. And this is where Epictetus walks in. He doesn't offer a hug. He doesn't offer a manifestation journal. He offers a scalpel. He cuts right to the bone of the human problem with one fundamental rule. The dichotomy of control. This isn't just a nice idea. It is the whole ballgame. Epictetus says there are two categories in life. Category A, things up to us. Category B, things not up to us. Sounds simple, right? It's not. We mess this up 50 times before breakfast. What's in our power? Our opinions, our aims, our desires, our aversions. Basically, the software running inside your skull. That's it. That's the list. What's not in our power? Your body, your property, your reputation, your boss, the weather, the stock market, whether or not people think you're cool. Here is why we are anxious wrecks. We stake our happiness on category B. We want the promotion. We want the six-pack abs. We want everyone to love our Instagram post. But those things are owned by fortune, not us. So when we don't get them, we grieve. We get envious. We throw tantrums like toddlers who dropped their ice cream. Epictetus looks at us and basically says, you're trying to play God with things you don't own. Stop it. If you respect the distinction, if you focus strictly on your own choices and let the rest go, you become, in his words, invincible. Not because you're tough, but because nobody can hurt a man who doesn't care about what he can't control. The nature of true freedom. And this leads us to freedom, but not the kind of freedom we usually talk about. We think freedom is having $1 billion and a private jet. Epictetus says, no, that's just slavery with better catering. Think about it. Epictetus was a slave. Physically, he walked with a limp because his master reportedly twisted his leg until it snapped. And yet, he looked at Nero, the emperor of Rome, the most powerful man on earth, and realized Nero was the slave. Nero was a slave to paranoia, to public opinion, to his own twisted desires. Epictetus was free. Why? Because freedom isn't an external status, it's an internal state. He defines freedom in a way that breaks your brain a little. Freedom is the ability to have things happen exactly as you wish. How? By forcing the world to bend to your will? No, by bending your will to the world. You wish for things to happen exactly as they do happen. If it rains, you want it rain. If you get fired, you want it to test your resilience. You align your will with reality, and suddenly you can never be disappointed. Prohairesis, the moral will. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so I just roll over and accept everything? I'm a doormat? Absolutely not, because you have a fortress to defend. Epictetus calls it prohairesis. It's a Greek word that roughly translates to moral will or faculty of choice. This is the only thing that is truly yours. A thief can steal your car, a disease can steal your health, a tyrant can take your life, but not even Zeus himself can conquer your prohairesis. It is the eye behind your eyes. Your job isn't to control the world. Your job is to keep your character unbribed and uncoerced, to never sell your integrity for a little bit of comfort. You are not your body. That's just a meat suit you're wearing. You are your will. So, how do we protect this will? We need a bouncer at the door of the mind. Epictetus teaches the discipline of assent.
Here's what happens all day long. Impressions strike us. Fantasia. You see a text message from your ex. That's the impression. Immediately, your brain screams, "This is bad, this is a disaster, I am unlovable." Epictetus says, "Whoa, hold on. You have to pause. The pause is everything." You talk to the impression. You literally say to it, "Stop. Let me see what you are. You are just an impression, not the thing itself."
You test it. Is this text message actually bad? Or is it just pixels on a screen? The badness is a judgment you added. Refuse to assent to the judgment, and you remove the pain. Emotional resilience and apatheia. If you do this enough, you reach apatheia. Now, warning, this doesn't mean apathy. It doesn't mean you turn into a stone statue or a sociopath. Stoics love their families. They cry when they grieve. But they are free from pathe, unhealthy, irrational passions. They don't let emotions hijack the steering wheel. It's about converting raw, screaming emotion into a rational response. It's the discipline of endure and renounce. Eneko kai apeko. Endure the hardships life throws at you because they are inevitable. Renounce the pleasures that trap you because they are dangerous. Self-mastery through renunciation. It brings us to the ultimate metaphor. Life is a banquet. Epictetus says, imagine you are at a fancy dinner. A platter is being passed around. When it comes to you, reach out and take a polite portion. If it passes you by, don't scream at the waiter. If it hasn't come yet, don't stretch your neck out like a hungry dog looking for it. Wait. That is self-mastery. The willingness to seem foolish to the outside world, to let go of the desperate need for more, to treat your body like a garment. Keep it clean, keep it functional, but don't fall in love with it. Because eventually you have to give the garment back, and the only thing you get to keep is who you were while you wore it. Look, let's be real. Life is going to punch you in the face. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And honestly, probably how hard. You lose the job, the car breaks down, you get sick, someone you love walks out. Most of us, we fall apart. We scream at the sky. We ask, why me? Epictetus looks at us, hobbling around on his crippled leg. Yeah, remember, the guy was a slave. He knew suffering better than us. And he says, you're miserable because you're trying to control the weather. This is the bedrock, the dichotomy of control. It sounds simple. It's actually infuriatingly hard. There are things up to us. There are things not up to us. Up to us, our opinions, our impulses, our desires. Basically, what happens inside your own skull. That is your kingdom. Not up to us, literally everything else. Your body, not yours. A virus can take it. Your reputation, not yours. People can lie. Your bank account, not yours. Markets crash. The misery, the anxiety, the sleepless nights comes from one specific error. You want the things you can't have. You're betting your happiness on a horse race where you don't own the horses, the track, or the jockey. But here's the twist. The adversity itself, that car crash, that breakup, Epictetus says that's not the problem. This is his core maxim, the one you should tattoo on your forehead. It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about them. An event is neutral. It's just data. I lost my job. That's a fact. I lost my job and now I'm a worthless failure who will die alone under a bridge. That is a judgment. That is you adding flavor to a poison that was essentially water. We have to master the pause. That split second between something happening and you freaking out. The Stoics call it checking the impression. Someone insults you? Pause. Don't react. Ask yourself, is this up to me? No? Then it's nothing to you. So, if we stop screaming at the universe, what do? We treat life like a gym. This is my favorite part of Epictetus. He doesn't want you to be a passive doormat. He wants you to be an athlete. Why does bad stuff happen? Why does God, or the universe, or nature throw garbage at you? Epictetus says, God has paired you with a rough antagonist.
Like a wrestling coach. If you have a coach who loves you, he doesn't let you wrestle the toddler next door. He puts you in the ring with a 300-pound gorilla. Why? To turn you into an Olympian, to build spiritual muscle. Without the Hydra, Hercules is just a guy with a club. The monster defines the hero. The obstacle defines the character. So when things go wrong, don't say, "This is unfair." Say, time for the heavy lifting.
The 2 pillars and the citadel. To survive the ring, you need 2 words, aneku and apenchu, bear and forbear. Bear the pain that is unavoidable. Don't whine about it. Enduring sickness, poverty, bad weather, that's just the cost of admission to life. Forbear the pleasures that trap you. Resist the temptation to complain, to cheat, to take the easy way out. This creates the invincible human, not someone who doesn't feel pain. Epictetus isn't asking you to be a rock. He's asking you to be a fortress. This is the prohairesis, your moral will, your character. That is the citadel. A tyrant can chain your leg. He can throw you in prison. He can take your head, but he cannot touch your will unless you let him. If you value your character more than your body, you are untouchable. You are free inside the cage. You look at the tyrant and say, you can hurt the vessel, but you can't touch the owner. And finally, we reach the hardest level, amor fati. Don't just tolerate the script, love the script. Epictetus says, don't seek for things to happen as you wish, but wish for things to happen as they do, and your life will go smoothly. It's radical acceptance, but it's not giving up. It's aligning yourself with reality so you stop breaking your bones against it. And if it gets too hard, if the room fills with too much smoke, the door is open. So thank the trainer. He gave you a hard sparring partner today. It means he thinks you're ready for the main event. Look, we need to have a serious talk about the word good, because you and I, we use that word loosely. A cold beer on a Friday? Good. A promotion? Good. Your ex-partner realizing they made a huge mistake and begging for you back? Very good. But Epictetus thinks we're idiots. Well, maybe not idiots, just confused, misguided. See, he starts with this concept of the summum bonum, the highest good. And here is the hard truth, the pill that is incredibly difficult to swallow. The only thing that is truly good is virtue. That's it. It's not pleasure. Sorry, Epicureans. I know, pleasure feels nice. I like a soft pillow as much as the next guy. But pleasure is biological. Even a rat can feel pleasure. A rat cannot possess moral character. For Epictetus, good has a very strict definition. It must be moral, it must be rational, and this is the kicker, it must be under your control. If you can't control it, it can't be the good. Because if your happiness relies on something you can lose, you're basically building your house on quicksand and acting surprised when it sinks. The concept of adiaphora, indifference. So if virtue is the only good and vice is the only bad, what is everything else? What about health, money, reputation, death? Epictetus calls these adiaphora, indifference. Now, don't panic. Indifferent doesn't mean we don't care. It doesn't mean you walk into traffic because health is indifferent. That would be stupid. Epictetus hates stupidity. We have preferred indifference and dispreferred indifference. Obviously, I prefer to be healthy. I prefer to have enough money to buy coffee. But, and here's the distinction that changes your entire life, I do not attach my flourishing to them. Think of it like this. You are a sculptor. Your life is the art. Sometimes fate gives you marble, beautiful, white, pristine marble. Sometimes fate gives you a pile of mud. The marble is wealth. The mud is poverty or sickness. The material doesn't matter. The art matters. The sculpting matters. You can make a masterpiece out of mud, and you can make a chaotic mess out of marble. The external world is just the clay. Virtue is the skill of the sculptor. The role of prohairesis, moral purpose, will. This brings us to the engine of the whole system, the prohairesis. It's a fancy Greek word, but it just means your moral will, your faculty of choice. Epictetus was obsessed with this. He was a slave, right? He had a master who could ostensibly break his leg, and probably did. But Epictetus realized something terrifyingly powerful. You can break my leg, but you cannot break my will to be a good man. That is the fortress, the citadel. The prohairesis is the only thing that is truly yours. The government can take your house. A virus can take your health. A rumor can take your reputation. But not even Zeus himself can force you to assent to a false idea or commit a vice. That territory is sovereign. So, how do we actually do this? How do we live in this fortress? It comes down to handling impressions, fantasia. We walk around all day getting bombarded. An impression hits you. My boss yelled at me. Immediately, your brain adds a judgment, and that is bad. I am a victim. This is a catastrophe. Epictetus says, stop. You have to be a bouncer at the door of your mind. When an impression walks up, you ask for ID. You say, hold on. You look like a catastrophe, but are you? Or are you just a loud noise coming from my boss's mouth? Virtue isn't some mystical state of nirvana. It's the constant, grinding work of correcting your judgments. It's looking at money and saying, tool, not goal. It's looking at an insult and saying, noise, not harm. And that leads to the paradox, the one that makes you sound crazy at dinner parties. No man can hurt you. You hear that and think, buddy, I can think of 5 people who could hurt me right now. But Epictetus is talking about the real you, the will. If someone beats you up, they hurt your body. That's an external, and indifferent. But if you become angry, if you become bitter, vengeful, and lose your self-control, now you've been harmed, but you did it to yourself. The only real loss is the loss of your character. The only tragedy is becoming a worse person. If you keep your integrity, you are invincible. You literally cannot be a victim. We aren't trying to do one good deed a day like a Boy Scout. We are trying to build a state of character, consistency, harmony. Epictetus gives us this killer analogy. I love this one. He says life is a play. The playwright, God, nature, the universe, hands you a script. Maybe you're cast as the king. Maybe you're the beggar. Maybe you're the guy who dies in Act 1. You don't get to choose the role. Your only job is to play the role well. If you're the beggar, be the best damn beggar the stage has ever seen. Walk with dignity. Speak with clarity. Do not complain that you aren't the king. The actor playing the king isn't better than you. He just has different lines. So, stop looking at the other actors. Stop looking at the props. Look at your script. Look at your will. Play the role. That is virtue, and that is the only thing that counts. Let's get the big one out of the way first. The phrase that gets thrown around in every Stoic Reddit thread,
usually by people who think it means going for a hike without a shirt on. Live in accordance with nature. Now, if you're like me, when you hear nature, you think of birds, bees, maybe a nice mountain stream. You think Epictetus wants you to abandon civilization and live in a barrel like Diogenes. And while living in a barrel has its financial perks in this economy, that is not what the old man meant. See, Epictetus was a slave. He had a crippled leg. He didn't have the luxury of romanticizing the wilderness. When he says nature, or vices if you want to sound pretentious at parties, he's talking about two things. Specifically, two things that are constantly fighting inside you. First, the universe, the big blueprint, the way things actually work, not how you wish they worked. And second, human nature, the specks of the machine that is you. Here is the chaotic part. Most of us, we are terrible at being human. We are embarrassing. Epictetus looked around his classroom in Nicopolis, probably spit flying everywhere because he got excited, and he would call his students wretched. He'd call them slaves. He'd ask, "Why do you act like a sheep?" Or worse, a wolf. Because that's the baseline. We are animals. We eat, we sleep, we procreate. If that is all you do, if you just chase pleasure and run away from pain, you are, by definition, just a really clever animal. You are acting like a sheep. You follow the flock, you get scared, you bleat when things go wrong. Or you get aggressive. Someone cuts you off in traffic and you lose your mind. You snap at your waiter. You try to dominate. Congratulations, you're a wolf. Epictetus says this is a betrayal of your nature. Why? Because nature gave you something the wolf and the sheep don't have. The hegemonicon, the ruling faculty, reason. This isn't just being smart. It's the ability to look at your own mind. A dog can be angry, but a dog cannot sit there and ask, wait, is this anger actually helpful, or am I just hungry? You can. That is your specific superpower. That is what makes you human. So when you choose not to use it, when you let your impulses drive the car, you are degrading yourself. You are literally being unnatural. So step 1 of living according to nature, stop acting like a beast. Use the mind you were given. But then it gets harder, because then you have to deal with the rest of the world. This is where the cosmic nature comes in, and this is the part that hurts. You have to realize that you are not the main character. I know, it stings. We all think we're the protagonist of the movie, but Epictetus says, no, you are a foot. Imagine a foot. If a foot had a brain and it was a selfish, uneducated foot, it would say, I want to be clean. I want to step on silk pillows. I refuse to step in mud. But because it is a foot and it is attached to a body, sometimes its job is to step in the mud so the body can get home. If the foot understood its nature, it wouldn't complain about the mud. It would realize, oh, this is my role. This is what the whole needs me to do right now. That is cosmic acceptance. When you lose your job, when you get sick, when your Wi-Fi cuts out during a Zoom call, that is the mud. If you scream and fight against it, you are fighting reality. And reality is undefeated. You will lose that fight every single time. Epictetus says when you fight what happens, you are trying to be a usurper of Zeus. You're trying to run the universe. And frankly, you're not qualified. But here is the trick. This doesn't mean you're a doormat. Epictetus isn't saying just give up. He's saying play your role. We are social animals. That's the other part of our nature. We aren't solitary tigers. We are bees in a hive. If you try to be the lone wolf, the sigma male grinding in isolation, you are failing at being human. You have roles. You are a son, a father, a citizen, a friend. Nature demands you fulfill those roles. If your father is annoying, too bad. Nature gave you a father. It didn't promise a good one. Your duty is to be a good son, regardless of how he acts. That is under your control. His behavior? Not your problem. It all comes down to the prohairesis, your will, your moral choice. This is the only thing that is truly yours. The government can take your money. A thief can take your laptop. A virus can take your health. Even a tyrant can take your life, but no one, not even God, Epictetus says, can force you to assent to a false idea. No one can force you to abandon your character. If you keep that will clean, if you stay honest, brave, and kind, you are living in accordance with nature. You are safe. And if it gets too hard, if the room fills with smoke and you can't breathe, Epictetus gives us the darkest, most liberating comfort of all. He says, "The door is open." You can always leave. Death is the return to the elements. It's not a tragedy. It's just nature taking its stuff back. Knowing you can leave means you don't have to be afraid of anything in this life. You aren't trapped. You're here because you choose to be. So if you stay, play the game properly. Don't be a sheep. Don't be a wolf. Be a rational, social human being who knows they are just a foot stepping in the mud. Look, we need to talk about the difference between reading the menu and actually eating the dinner. Most of us, we're menu experts. We memorize the quotes, we buy the memento mori coins, we post Marcus Aurelius snippets on Twitter. But the second someone cuts us off in traffic, we lose our minds. We scream, we spiral. That is exactly what Epictetus hated. He called it vomiting up the lecture notes. Gross, right? But accurate. He didn't want students who could recite theory. He wanted students who didn't fall apart when life got hard. That requires askesis, training. You don't get abs by reading about sit-ups, and you don't get a stoic character by reading the Enchiridion. You have to do the reps.
Epictetus broke this training down into 3 distinct fields, or topoi. Think of them as the 3 gyms you have to visit every single day if you want to reach eudaimonia, that flourishing, I'm good no matter what happens state of mind. The first discipline, the discipline of desire, or exis. This is the beginner level, but honestly, most of us act like toddlers here. The discipline of desire is about fixing your broken want button. Here is the hard truth. You are miserable because you want things you can't have, and you're terrified of things you can't avoid. You want the promotion. You want people to like you. You want to not die. But guess what? None of that is fully up to you.
Epictetus is shouting from the back of the room, "Stop trying to control the uncontrollable." This is the famous dichotomy of control, but it's not just a logic puzzle, it's an emotional shield. If you pin your happiness on things outside your control, whether the economy, your ex-partner's opinion, you are a slave. You're letting the world dictate your mood. The goal here is apatheia. Now, be careful. That doesn't mean apathy in the modern sense of lying on the couch watching Netflix because you don't care. It means freedom from irrational passions. It means you are invincible. You accept the universe exactly as it is, amor fati. You don't just tolerate the rain, you love the rain because it's raining. The second discipline, the discipline of action, horme. Okay, so you've mastered your desires, you're zen. You don't scream when you spill coffee. Now what? You can't just sit in a cave and meditate. You're a human being, a social animal. This is where the discipline of action comes in. It's about how we treat people. It's about kathekanta, appropriate acts. We have roles: father, brother, citizen, employee. Epictetus says you have to play these roles well, even if the other person is terrible at theirs. Your dad is a jerk? That's his problem. Your job is to be a good son, period. But here is the trick. The reserve clause. This is the Stoic superpower.
When you act, you do your absolute best, but you add a mental asterisk. I will sail across the ocean, fate permitting. You aim the arrow with perfect form, but once it leaves the bow, where it lands isn't up to you. A gust of wind might take it. If you attach your ego to the result, you'll be anxious. If you focus on the action itself, doing it with justice and philanthropy, you are free. The third discipline, the discipline of ascent, syncotathesis. This is the black belt level, the PhD stuff, the discipline of ascent. It happens in your head, specifically in the split second between seeing something and judging it. Your brain is a drama queen. It lies to you constantly. You see your friend frown and your brain screams, "They hate me." That is an impression. It's a raw data feed. But then you add a judgment. This is bad.
Epictetus says, stop. Don't give your assent to that impression. Strip it naked. Remove the value judgment. Your friend isn't hating you. Your friend just moved their facial muscles. Maybe they have a headache. Who knows? This discipline requires the pause. When an angry thought hits you, tell it, wait for me a little. Let me see what you are. It's about strict objectivity. It's seeing reality without the emotional baggage we pile on top of it. How the three disciplines work together. So how does this all fit? It's a system. The discipline of desire protects your heart, keeping you serene by accepting fate. The discipline of action guides your hand, ensuring you act with justice and kindness. The discipline of assent guards your head, keeping you anchored in truth, not paranoia. You start as a novice, crying over spilled milk. You train, you fail, you train again, and eventually, you become the person Epictetus knew you could be. Someone who is free. Someone who can stand in the middle of a storm and say, "This is fine," and actually mean it. Let's get one thing straight before we start. When I say mindfulness, you probably picture a calm app, a yoga mat, and maybe some herbal tea. You're thinking about relaxing. Epictetus would laugh at that, loudly. For him, mindfulness, or prosoche, isn't about clearing your head. It's about paranoia, constructive paranoia. It's the art of continuous, relentless attention. Think of your mind less like a spa and more like a nightclub. You are the bouncer. The ruling faculty, or hegemonicon, is the guy at the door with the clipboard. Every impression, every thought that walks up to the velvet rope needs to be checked. You don't just let them in because they're dressed nice. Epictetus says when you relax your attention, you don't just lose that moment, you lose the habit. You think, I'll pay attention tomorrow. No, you won't, because today you practiced being a slacker. So how do we actually do this? We use the discipline of assent. This is where we get a little aggressive. An impression hits you. Maybe it's an insult from your boss. Maybe it's a flash of road rage because someone cut you off in traffic. Your instinct is to react, to scream, to spiral. Epictetus says, stop. Literally, talk to the thought. Say, wait, let me see your ID. You strip the mask off, you look at the situation and say, you are just an impression. You are not the thing you claim to be. The event is just a car changing lanes. The judgment that he disrespected you is something you added. It's a story you told yourself, and you can choose to stop telling it. But that's hard to do in the heat of the moment, which is why you need a warm-up. Enter the morning and evening meditations. Most people wake up and check Instagram. The Stoic wakes up and checks their armor. You ask yourself, what do I lack to be free from passion today? You rehearse the day. You don't visualize success. You visualize the annoyance. You tell yourself, today I will probably meet a jerk. The traffic will likely be terrible. The coffee might be cold. If you expect the world to be a paradise, you're going to be miserable by 9 a.m. If you expect a bit of chaos, you're invincible. And then comes the evening review,
the Pythagorean review. This isn't a gratitude journal where you write, "I'm thankful for sunlight." This is a performance review. You ask 3 questions. Where did I go wrong? What did I do right? What duty is left undone? Be honest. If you lost your temper, admit it. If you kept your cool when the waiter messed up your order, give yourself a pat on the back. It's about data, not guilt.
Now, we have to talk about the heavy stuff, the premeditatio malorum,
Premeditation of adversity. This is where Epictetus gets intense. He wants you to visualize the worst-case scenarios: exile, sickness, death. Why? So they don't ambush you. He has this analogy, and I warn you, it's going to sound sociopathic, called kissing the child.
But look at the intent. He's not telling you to be morbid. He's telling you to realize that this moment is borrowed. The child is not yours to keep forever. They are a loan from the universe. If you remember that they are mortal, right now, in this moment, how much more precious does that kiss become? You don't take it for granted. You don't scroll on your phone while they talk to you. You are fully there, because you know the open door is always there. The exit is real.
This brings us to the mental models, the frameworks you carry in your pocket. First, the 2 handles. Every situation has 2 handles. One you can carry it by, and one you can't. Your brother treats you unfairly. If you grab the handle of "he's unjust," you'll be bitter. You can't carry that. It's too heavy. But if you grab the handle of "he is my brother, and we were raised together," you can carry it. Same situation, different grip. And finally, remember your role, the actor in a play. You don't choose the script. You didn't ask to be short or tall or born in this century or to have this specific weird family. You're just the actor. The author, God, nature, the universe, wrote the play. Your job isn't to rewrite the script. Your job is to play the role of guy who got fired or woman who is sick, with dignity, with skill. That is the only thing that is truly yours, your prohairesis, your moral choice. Everything else, it's just scenery. So we need to talk about the book, the manual, the legendary Enchiridion. If you're expecting some massive dust-collecting tome that you put on your coffee table to look smart, you're going to be disappointed. Seriously, it's tiny. You could read the whole thing in an hour, maybe 30 minutes if you skip the parts where he yells at you. But don't skip those parts. Those are the best parts. See, Epictetus didn't actually write this. He didn't write anything. He was too busy teaching, or maybe he just couldn't be bothered with the paperwork. I respect that. The guy who actually put pen to paper was his student, Arrian. Think of Arrian as the guy in the front row frantically taking notes while the professor is dropping bomb after bomb. Arrian compiled the discourses, which are long and rambling, and then he distilled the absolute potent essentials into this little handbook. And the name matters, Enchiridion. It sounds fancy, right? Like something you'd name a spaceship. But it literally means in the hand, ready at hand. It's a dagger, a small sword. That's the vibe. This isn't a theoretical treatise on the metaphysics of the cosmos. It's a weapon, a shank you keep in your pocket for when life tries to mug you in a dark alley. It's designed for the prokopton. That's us, the students, the ones trying to make progress. It's a field manual for not losing your mind when the world is on fire. Which brings us to the core of the whole thing. Chapter 1, the fundamental dichotomy. If you take nothing else away from this, take this. Tattoo it on your arm, or just, put it on a sticky note. Some things are up to us, and some things are not up to us. Simple, right? Deceptively simple. Because most of us, and I'm including myself here, usually around 3 a.m. when I'm worrying about something stupid, we get this backwards every single day. Here is what is up to you: your opinions, your impulses, your desires, your aversions. Basically, the stuff happening inside your own skull, the internal operating system.
Here is what is not up to you: your body, your property, your reputation, your job, the external. And I know, you're thinking, wait, my body isn't up to me? I go to the gym, I eat kale. Good for you. But a virus doesn't care about your kale. A drunk driver doesn't care about your bench press. You have influence, sure, but you don't have sovereign control. Epictetus says that if you confuse these two lists, if you try to control what you can't or neglect what you can, you will be thwarted, miserable, and upset. You will blame gods and men. You'll be a slave, not metaphorically. He was an actual slave for a huge chunk of his life. So when he uses that word, he means it. Freedom isn't about legal status. It's about knowing what is yours and what isn't. So, how do we apply this? This leads to the discipline of desire and aversion. This is where Epictetus gets a little intense. He tells us to align our will with nature. Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do happen. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Until something bad happens. He talks about the broken cup. He says, if you are fond of a jug, say, I am fond of a jug, for then when it is broken, you will not be upset. Okay, easy enough. It's just a cup. I break things all the time. But then he pivots. He looks you right in the eye and says, if you kiss your child or your wife, say that you are kissing a human being, for when they die, you will not be upset. Whoa, pump the brakes, old man. That's cold. But is it? Or is it just radically, painfully honest? He's not telling you not to love them. He's telling you not to lie to yourself about what they are. They are mortal. They are fragile. They are on loan. If you cling to them as if they are permanent, you are setting yourself up for total collapse. He wants you to enjoy the dinner party, but remember that the party has to end. He even reframes death itself. He says death isn't terrible, otherwise Socrates would have thought it was terrible. What's terrible is our judgment that death is terrible. It's the story we tell ourselves that scares us, not the event. Now, let's talk about action. How do we actually behave in this mess of a world? Epictetus loves the actor in a play analogy. I love this one because it takes the pressure off. He says, look, you're an actor in a drama. The playwright, fate, God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, chose the role. Maybe you're the king. Maybe you're the beggar. Maybe you're the cripple. Your job isn't to cast the play. Your job is to play the role well. If you're the beggar, be the best damn beggar that stage has ever seen. Do it with dignity. Do it with style. Don't stand there whining, why can't I be the king? The king has his own problems. Just say your lines. He also uses the banquet analogy. Life is a dinner party. A dish is passed around. When it reaches you, stretch out your hand and take a polite portion. If it passes you by, don't scream. If it hasn't come yet, don't yearn for it. Wait. Most of us are like toddlers at this banquet, grabbing at the waiter's tray. I want the promotion. I want the recognition. Epictetus is finning back, sipping his wine, saying, relax. If it comes, it comes. If not, I wasn't hungry anyway. This applies to social roles too. You have duties. If you have a father, you have a duty to be a son or daughter. But my father is a jerk. Epictetus doesn't care. Nature gave you a father, not necessarily a good father. Your duty is to your own character. If you get angry and resentful because he's a jerk, now there are two jerks. And insults? Oh, he's great on insults. If someone insults you, realize that they are acting on their own impression. They think they're right. They're mistaken? That's their problem.
They're the ones being deceived. Why should you get mad because someone else has bad eyesight? It's about managing impressions. This is the discipline of assent. Every time something happens, a rude email, a flat tire, a seductive glance, an impression hits your mind. Epictetus says, stop. Talk to the impression, literally. Say to it, you are just an appearance and not at all what you appear to be. Test it. Measure it against the rules. Is this thing up to me or not up to me? If it's not up to you, it is nothing to me. This gives you the power of the pause, that split second between the stimulus and the response. That's where your freedom lives. He also suggests some psychological distancing. You know how when your neighbor breaks a cup, you say, oh well, accidents happen, but when you break a cup, you scream at the universe? Epictetus says to treat your own accidents like your neighbor's accidents. Look at your own life from the outside. It makes the tragedy a lot more like a comedy.
Now, let's get into the lifestyle stuff, the practical recommendations. Epictetus wasn't a fan of small talk. He explicitly says, be silent for the most part. Or if you speak, say only what is necessary and in a few words. And for the love of Zeus, don't gossip. He warns against talking about gladiators, horse races, or athletes. Today, he'd probably say, shut up about politics and fantasy football. It's trivial. It dilutes your mind. He's tough on physical austerity, too. Don't be flashy. Treat your body well enough so it works, but don't obsess over it. And sex. Look, the Stoics weren't prudes, but they were about self-control. He says to keep it lawful, keep it respectful. But here's the kicker. If you are chaste, don't be annoying about it. Don't go around rubbing your virtue in people's faces. Nobody likes the guy who orders a salad and then judges everyone else for eating pizza. I, for one, treat my body as a temple. Yeah? Well, you're treating your personality like a dumpster fire. Sit down. But your will, your capacity to choose how you respond, that is untouchable, unless you surrender it. So, how do you know if you're getting anywhere? How do you know if you're actually becoming a philosopher and not just a person who memorized some quotes? Epictetus gives us the signs of progress. Number 1, you blame no one. You praise no one. If you're still saying, my boss makes me so angry, you're a novice. You're still outsourcing your emotional control. The philosopher looks at himself like an enemy in ambush. He's vigilant. He knows the real danger isn't the guy cutting him off in traffic. The danger is his own reaction. And then, my favorite analogy in the whole book, the sheep. He says, sheep do not vomit up their grass to show the shepherds how much they've eaten, but inwardly digesting their food, they outwardly produce wool and milk. Stop vomiting up quotes. Stop quoting Marcus Aurelius on Instagram to show everyone how deep you are. That's undigested grass. It's gross. Nobody wants to see that. Show me the wool. Show me the patience. Show me the resilience. Show me the character. If you really read the book, I shouldn't need to hear you quote the book. I should see it in how you handle a crisis. Consistency is key here. You can't be a stoic in the library and a hedonist at the bar. Well, you can, but you're just confused. We wrap up the book with the ultimate goal. Why are we doing all this? Why the discipline? Why the constant self-monitoring? It's for ataraxia, tranquility, unshakable peace of mind, and eudaimonia, flourishing. But there is a price. If you want your children and your wife and your friends to live forever, you are silly. If you wish your servant to be without fault, you are a fool. You want tranquility? You have to pay for it. The price is giving up the illusion of control. You can't have both. You can't be terrified of losing things and also be at peace. You have to choose. The book ends with a massive call to action. He basically grabs you by the shoulders and shakes you. How long will you delay thinking yourself worthy of the best things? You've read the principles. You know what to do. You're not a kid anymore. If you keep procrastinating, if you keep saying, "I'll start tomorrow, I'll start next week," you're going to die one day, having made zero progress. A generic, frustrated, anxious mess. Don't do that. This little book, this small sword, it's yours now. Put it in your pocket. And the next time life tries to punch you in the throat, use it. So, the book, actually, let's stop right there. It's not a book. Not really. If you go to a bookstore, do people still go to bookstores? And you pick up a copy of the Discourses, you see the name Epictetus on the cover in big, bold, serious letters. Like he sat down with a quill and some parchment and thought, "Yes, today I shall write a masterpiece." He didn't. Epictetus didn't write a single word. Not one. He was too busy living the philosophy to bother writing it down. What you are holding, or reading on your Kindle, or listening to me talk about, is actually a bootleg, a pirate copy. It's a transcript. See, there was this guy, Flavius Arrianus, Arrian. Young guy, smart, probably a bit of a nerd. He's sitting in the front row of this dusty school in Nicopolis, Greece. It's around 108 AD. And while everyone else is getting their minds blown or their egos bruised by this crippled ex-slave teacher, Arrian is just scribbling furiously. He's using shorthand, hypomnemata. That's the fancy Greek word for it. It basically means notes to help remember stuff. He's not trying to write a bestseller. He's trying to capture the man, the voice, the anger, the jokes. Think about Socrates. Socrates didn't write anything either. We only know him because Plato and Xenophon wrote about him. Well, Arrian is Epictetus' Xenophon. Without this guy sitting there taking verbatim notes, we would have nothing. Epictetus would just be a name in a history book, a ghost. But because Arrian was obsessive, we have the Discourses. And let's talk about the setting for a second, because context matters. We are not in a lecture hall at Harvard. We are in Nicopolis. It's a transit town, a place people pass through. And the students? They aren't philosophy majors. They are young Roman aristocrats, rich kids, future senators, the sons of the elite. They are wearing expensive togas. They have perfectly styled hair, and they think they know everything. And then there's Epictetus. He's old, he's lame in one leg, tortured by a former master, or maybe born that way. Stories vary. But the point is, he's physically broken. He has no money, no power, no status. And he is absolutely tearing these rich kids apart. The atmosphere isn't polite. It's not, "Please open your textbooks to page 40. It's confrontational. It's intense. It's informal. Students are asking questions about their girlfriends, their careers, their fears of the emperor, and Epictetus is there poking them, prodding them, sometimes mocking them, and Arrian captured all of it. Now, here is the tragedy, the painful part. Arrian originally compiled 8 books of these notes. 8. We have 4. Books 1 through 4 survived the Dark Ages, the fires, the moths, and time itself. But books 5 through 8? Gone. Dust. There's even a specific discourse on friendship that we see referenced in other ancient texts, and we just don't have it. It's like missing the season finale of the greatest show ever written. We just have to live with that loss. It's a very Stoic problem, actually. You can't control the survival of ancient manuscripts, so don't get upset about it, right? Easier said than done. But what we do have is pure gold. Now, you might have heard of the Enchiridion, or the handbook.
A lot of people start there. It's short, it's punchy, it's full of one-liners. But here is the difference. The Enchiridion is the greatest hits album. It's polished. It's the aphorisms stripped of context. It's safe.
The Discourses? This is the raw footage. This is the long-form argument. This is where you see the why behind the what. The Enchiridion tells you don't let things upset you. The Discourses explains the deep psychological mechanics of how to actually do that without losing your mind. And because these are transcripts, the structure is chaotic. I love it, but it's a mess.
There is no systematic order. It's not Chapter 1 logic, Chapter 2 ethics. No. One day Epictetus is talking about God. The next day he's yelling at a student for dressing too flashy. The next day he's talking about how to eat dinner properly. It's conversational. It bounces around based on who was in the room that day and what stupid question they asked. So don't expect a textbook. Expect a conversation. Okay, let's get into the meat of it, the doctrines. What was he actually teaching in that room? If you take nothing else away from this, take this, the dichotomy of control. I know, you've heard it. Some things are up to us, some things are not. It sounds like a bumper sticker, but Epictetus takes this idea and turns it into a weapon. He calls it the fundamental divide. On one side, you have ta ephemin, what is up to us. On the other, ta upephemin, what is not up to us. What's in the us column? It's a very short list. Opinion, aim, desire, aversion. That's it. Basically, your internal mental movements, your judgment. What's in the not us column? Everything else. Your body, your property, your reputation, your job, the weather, the economy, the traffic, whether people like you, whether you get sick, whether you die. Epictetus is obsessed with this. He brings it up constantly. He says the root of all human suffering, all of it, is confusing these two lists. We try to control the not us column, and we neglect the us column. We obsess over our reputation, which we can't control, and we ignore our own judgment, which we can. We are terrified of death, which is inevitable, but we are careless with our desires, which are optional. He says if you want to be free, truly free, not just legally free, you have to lock your focus entirely on that first column. And this leads to his favorite concept, prohairesis. If you want to sound smart at a dinner party, drop this word, prohairesis. It translates roughly to moral purpose or will or the faculty of choice. But really, it's you. It's the real you. Epictetus says your body isn't you. Your body is just cleverly molded clay. It's a donkey you're tethered to. But your prohairesis, that is your fortress. He has this incredible line. He says, "You can chain my leg, but not even Zeus can conquer my will." Think about the audacity of that. A crippled ex-slave looking up at the sky and telling the king of the gods, "You can't touch me, not in here." He believes that the reasoned will is invincible. No tyrant, no jailer, no bad luck can force you to make a bad moral choice. They can kill you, sure, but they can't make you evil. Only you can do that. So the only true good and the only true evil are found in your choices. Everything else, it's just indifferent. It's just stuff. To help his students practice this, because let's be honest, this is hard, he gave them 3 disciplines, the 3 topi. First, the discipline of desire. This is about training your wanter. Most of us are miserable because we want things we can't have. We want the promotion, we want the girl, we want the accolades. Epictetus says, stop it. Train yourself to desire only what is in your control, your own virtue, your own understanding, and learn to accept fate. If it happens, it's good. If it doesn't, that's also good. Second, the discipline of action. This is how we deal with people, because we have to live in the world, right? We can't just sit in a cave. This discipline is about duty, roles. You are a son, a father, a citizen. Act like it. Even if your father is terrible, you still have the duty of a son. You act with justice and kindness, not because the other person deserves it, but because you are a human being. Third, the discipline of assent. This is the Jedi stuff. This is logic. It's about not getting tricked by your own impressions. You see a beautiful car. Your mind says, wow, having that car would make me happy. That's an impression. The discipline of assent is the ability to pause and say, wait, is that true? Or is it just a shiny piece of metal? It's about catching yourself before you buy into the lie. Now, we have to talk about God. I know, modern philosophy gets a bit squeamish about this. We like our Stoicism secular and scientific. But you can't read the Discourses without seeing that Epictetus was deeply religious. But not in a bearded guy in the clouds way. He talks about the city of gods and men. He believes the universe is rational. It's ordered. It's governed by the Logos, or Zeus, or nature. And here is the beautiful part. He says we are fragments of God. We carry a piece of the divine inside us. That's our reason. That's our prohairesis. So when you act like an idiot, when you lose your temper over a spilled coffee, you aren't just embarrassing yourself. You are polluting a fragment of God. You are parading God around in a state of disgrace. It raises the stakes, doesn't it? Let's talk about the teacher himself. The style. Reading the Discourses is fun. It's genuinely entertaining. Epictetus is funny, but he's also mean. He uses the Socratic method, which is basically asking questions until the other person realizes they are an idiot. But he adds a layer of tough love that borders on verbal abuse. He constantly calls his students slave. Listen to me, you slave. Now, remember, he was an actual slave. His students are rich, free-born Romans. Calling them slave is the ultimate ironic insult. He's telling them, you think you're free because you have a certificate of freedom? You're a slave to your mistress. You're a slave to your ambition. You're a slave to fear. I'm the one with the limp, but I'm the only free man in this room. He mocks them. He mimics their whining. He'll say things like, oh, but I have a headache. Oh, but my leg hurts. And then he'll snap. So what? Is your mind crippled? No? And shut up and do your work. He uses these vivid, crazy metaphors. He says life is like a banquet. You know how at a dinner party you don't reach over your neighbor to grab the platter? You wait for it to come to you. And if it passes you by, you don't scream. You just let it go. That's how you should treat life. He says, life is a play. You are an actor. God is the director. Maybe you got cast as the king. Maybe you got cast as the beggar. It doesn't matter. Your job isn't to choose the role. Your job is to play the role well. If you're a cripple, be the best damn cripple the stage has ever seen. Don't complain to the director that you wanted to be the hero. He compares us to Olympic athletes. He says philosophy is wrestling. Life is the opponent. It's trying to throw you. And every difficulty, every bad boss, every financial crisis is just God matching you with a rough sparring partner to make you stronger. Why has this happened to me? Because you're capable of handling it, he says. God wouldn't send a weakling into the ring with a giant. So, what is the legacy of this mess of a transcript? It's massive. The most famous fanboy of the Discourses was Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man on earth. We know for a fact that Marcus read Epictetus. He quotes him in his own diary, Meditations. He got a copy from his tutor, Rusticus. Think about that connection.
A slave teaches a lecture. A student writes it down. That student gives the notes to a tutor. The tutor gives them to an emperor. And the emperor uses the slave's words to cope with the burden of ruling the world. That is the power of this book. It survived. It influenced the early Christians. It influenced the modern psychologists. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is basically just Epictetus with a medical license.
And it's relevant today because it's not dry theory. It's not Chrysippus or Zeno drawing logic diagrams in the sand. It's a man grabbing you by the shoulders and shaking you. It's Epictetus looking across 2,000 years of history, straight at you, and saying, "Hey, you're anxious, you're scared, you're worshiping things that don't matter. Stop it. Look at what is yours. Look at your will. Clean it up and be free." That's the Discourses. It's not a book, it's an intervention.
So, Rome. It's 93 AD. The Emperor Domitian is, how do we put this politely, in a mood. He decides that philosophers are annoying, which, fair, we are. We ask too many questions. We don't applaud when the emperor makes a bad joke. So Domitian does what any insecure tyrant does. He banishes the lot of them. Get out, all of you. Now, if this happened to you or me, we'd be posting angry threads on Twitter. We'd be frantic. My career, my rent-controlled apartment near the Forum, my favorite wine bar. Epictetus? He just leaves. He heads to Nicopolis, Ypres, Western Greece. Now, you have to understand Nicopolis. It wasn't exactly Paris. It was a transit town, a place founded by Augustus to celebrate a victory, sure, but mostly it was a dusty hub where people stopped on their way to somewhere better. And here, in this dusty corner of the empire, the old man sets up shop. He didn't build a marketing funnel, he didn't run ads, he just sat down on a mat, probably adjusted his lame leg, and started talking, and the world came to him. This is the irony I love. He gets kicked out of the capital of the world, goes to the middle of nowhere, and suddenly Nicopolis becomes the destination. If you were a young Roman aristocrat, a rich kid with daddy issues, and a toga that cost more than a house, you stopped in Nicopolis. You went to see the old ex-slave to get your head screwed on straight before you went off to run the government. We hear rumors that even Emperor Hadrian came by. Hadrian, the guy who built the wall, the most powerful man on earth, potentially sitting in the dirt, listening to a crippled old man telling him that his power is fake. You control the armies, Hadrian? Cute. Can you control your temper? No? Then you're the slave, not me. I don't know if they were friends. Epictetus didn't really do friends in the way we do, brunch and gossip. But there was respect, because real power recognizes real authority, and Epictetus had authority. The house without a lock. Let's talk about his lifestyle, because it's hilarious. You'd think a guy with imperial connections would upgrade, maybe get a nice villa, a few servants, a heated floor. No. He lived in a house that didn't even have a lock on the door. Why bother locking the door when there's nothing inside worth stealing? It's the ultimate security system, poverty. But, and this is a great story, he did have one nice thing, just one, an iron lamp. He probably needed it to read. He's old, his eyes are going, so he has this iron lamp near his little shrine. One night, he hears a noise. He looks up. A thief. The guy grabs the lamp and runs. Now watch the reaction. Most of us, we're chasing the guy. We're screaming, "My lamp! Police! Help!" We are violated. We are angry. We spend the next 10 years talking about the incident. Epictetus just sighs. He looks at the empty spot on the table, and he says to himself, well, tomorrow I'll buy a clay lamp, a cheap one. His logic is brutal. The thief was better at stealing than I was at watching. He paid a price for the lamp too. He paid with his integrity. He became a thief for a piece of metal. Bad deal for him, good deal for me.
So, he gets a clay lamp, a garbage, breakable, cheap little lamp. And here's the punchline, the cosmic joke. After Epictetus dies, a fan, you know the type, the guy who buys the limited edition merch, buys that clay lamp at an auction. Do you know how much he paid? 3,000 drachmae, a fortune. This guy thought that if he lit the clay lamp, maybe the wisdom of Epictetus would magically float into his brain like smoke. It didn't work, obviously. But it proves Epictetus's point, doesn't it? We are obsessed with the things, the relics, the symbols. We miss the point entirely. The lamp didn't matter. The light did.
So he's living alone. He's celibate. He's in his, 70s? He's the ultimate monk figure. No attachments, no family drama, just logic and dust. And then chaos enters the chat. A friend of his, another guy in Nicopolis, is broke, desperately poor. And this friend has a baby. In the ancient world, if you couldn't afford a kid, you didn't just struggle through it. You exposed it. You left the baby outside, in the elements, to die. It was common. Brutal, but common. Epictetus hears about this. Now, strictly speaking, a Stoic shouldn't get worked up. It's not in my control, right? It's fate. Wrong. Epictetus looks at this situation and realizes that letting an innocent kid die when he can stop it is a violation of nature. It's a violation of oikeiosis, that natural affection we should have for other humans. So the 70-something-year-old philosopher with the bad leg and the clay lamp takes the baby. Can you imagine? He's been living in silence for decades. Now there's crying, poop, feeding schedules. He has to hire a nurse to help him. His entire, quiet, perfectly ordered life is blown to pieces. And he loves it. Or at least he accepts it. This is important. He didn't do it because he was lonely and wanted a cute grandkid to bounce on his knee. He didn't do it to feel good. He did it because it was the human thing to do. People think Stoicism is about being a stone statue. No, it's about doing your job. Sometimes your job is to lecture students. Sometimes your job is to change a diaper. If the universe hands you a baby, you don't say, "Sorry, this interferes with my meditation." You raise the kid. The man with the notebook. We wouldn't know any of this without Arrian. Flavius Arrianus. Around 108 AD, this young guy shows up. He's smart, he's ambitious. He's going to be a big deal in politics later, but for now, he's just a student. He sits in the lectures, and he realizes something. This magic, it disappears when the old man stops talking. Epictetus didn't write books. He didn't care about publishing. He was Socrates 2.0. He believed philosophy was a live sport. It happens now, in the conversation. But Arrian was a nerd. Thank God for nerds. He starts taking notes. Not just the main points, but the voice. He captures the sarcasm, the shouting, the way Epictetus would mock the students. You want to be a philosopher? Cut your hair first. You look ridiculous. Arrian wrote down the Discourses and the Enchiridion, the handbook. He calls them the living voice. And honestly, it feels like we are eavesdropping. When you read Marcus Aurelius, you're reading a diary. It's private. When you read Seneca, you're reading polished letters intended for publication. It's curated. But when you read Epictetus, thanks to Arrian, you are sitting on the dirt floor in Nicopolis. You can smell the sweat. You can feel the tension when the master yells at you. It's raw. Eventually, the machine breaks down. It's around 135 AD. Hadrian is emperor. The world is changing. Epictetus is old. He didn't have a dramatic death scene. He didn't drink hemlock like Socrates. He didn't slit his wrists like Seneca. He just stopped. He died of natural causes, which is a boring way to say his body did exactly what bodies are supposed to do. They wear out. But his attitude toward it, that's the lecture. He viewed death as returning what was lent. He used to say, "If the gods want me to have a fever, I will have a fever well," meaning I'll be the best sick person you've ever seen. I won't whine.
He viewed life like a dinner party. You show up, you eat a little, you talk to the person next to you, and when the host says, "Party's over," you don't grab the table leg and scream, "No, I want more hummus." You say, "Thank you for the invite. It was lovely," and you leave. That's the open door policy. If the room gets too smoky, meaning life becomes unbearable or impossible, the door is open. You can leave. But if you stay, don't complain about the smoke. He stayed until the end. He didn't rush it. He just walked through the door when it opened.
The mic drop. There's an epitaph. We think it's his. Even if it's not, it should be. It's the greatest bio in history. It goes like this. I was Epictetus, a slave, memed in body, heiress in poverty, and dear to the immortals. Look at that list. Slave, cripple, poor. In the eyes of the world, in the eyes of Rome, he was a loser. He was the bottom of the barrel. 0 social credit score. But the last line flips the table. Dear to the immortals. He won. He beat the game. He didn't need the money, or the legs, or the freedom papers. He had the only thing that mattered. He had his mind. He had his freedom. And nearly 2,000 years later, while we've forgotten the names of the rich merchants who bought his clay lamp, we are still talking about the slave. Class dismissed.
So picture where we are. We aren't in Athens. We aren't walking through the hallowed halls of the academy where Plato used to strut around. No, we are in Nicopolis. Nicopolis is, well, it's a bit of a dump. It's a transit town in western Greece. It's loud, it's dusty, and frankly, it's where you go when you've been kicked out of Rome, which is exactly what happened to Epictetus. Domitian, the emperor at the time, a real charmer, banished all the philosophers. So Epictetus sets up shop here. And his school, it wasn't a university. He didn't want it to be a place where you came to get a degree to impress your dad. He called it a hospital for the soul. Think about that. You don't go to a hospital to have fun. You don't go to admire the architecture. You go because you're broken. You're in pain. Epictetus was the surgeon. And let me tell you, he didn't believe in anesthesia. His audience wasn't just anyone. These were young Roman aristocrats, sons of senators, future officials, kids with silver spoons and very fragile egos. They came expecting to learn how to debate or how to sound smart at dinner parties. Instead, they got a lame old man. Literally, his leg was busted, yelling at them about their vanity. And we only know this because of Arrian. Arrian was basically the guy in the front row with a tape recorder. He wasn't writing down polished essays. He was capturing the diatribes, the live, messy, chaotic arguments. That's why reading Epictetus feels like getting punched in the gut. It's real, it's unpolished, it's alive. The theoretical framework. Now, Epictetus didn't care about theory for the sake of theory. He hated what he called literary philosophers. You know the type. They memorize whole books. They can quote Chrysippus, the heavy hitter of Stoic logic. But they fall apart if their soup is too cold. To him, philosophy was a techne, a craft, like carpentry. You don't learn to be a carpenter by reading a book about wood. You learn by getting splinters.
He broke this craft down into 3 specific fields. The fancy Greek word is topoi. First, the discipline of desire, orexis. This is the big one. Stop wanting things that aren't up to you. Stop trying to control the weather, the economy, or whether people like you. If you desire things you can't control, you're going to be miserable. Guaranteed. Second, the discipline of action, horme. This is about how you treat people. Just because you're a Stoic doesn't mean you get to be a robot. You have duties. You're a son, a father, a citizen. Act like it. Third, the discipline of assent, syncathesis. This is the advanced stuff. It's about not believing your own immediate thoughts.
It's about logic. When your brain tells you, this traffic jam is a tragedy, you need the discipline to say, no, it's just car is not moving. The tragedy is in my head. The goal of all this, eleutheria, freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom from being a slave to your own tantrums.
He wasn't nice about it, though. Epictetus used a style we call protreptic. It's basically shaming you into being a better person. He loved the Socratic method, but he added a layer of sarcasm that was just chef's kiss. He would invent this imaginary interlocutor. He'd pretend to be you arguing back, and he'd make you sound absolutely ridiculous.
But Epictetus, my nose is running.
So wipe it. Do you think you have hands for no reason? Or are you going to pray to God to wipe your nose for you? He was brutal. He used shock tactics. He called himself a physician, and he told his students, "You shouldn't leave my school feeling happy. You should leave in pain."
Because if you're fixing a dislocated shoulder, it's going to hurt. If the lecture didn't sting, it didn't work. But it was a tough love. He went after their egos because that's where the disease was. He looked these wealthy, powerful kids in the eye and told them they were slaves. Why? Because they feared the emperor, because they feared poverty.
Epictetus, the actual ex-slave, was the only free man in the room because he feared nothing. He demanded total accountability. It is up to you. That was the mantra. No excuses, no blaming your mom, no blaming the government.
He didn't use dry definitions. He used images. He saw life as a wrestling match. God, or nature, take your pick, is the trainer. And when life throws you a difficult partner, like a bad boss or a chronic illness, God is just pairing you with a tough sparring partner to make you an Olympic-level human being. You don't whine about the wrestler, you grapple.
Or, my favorite, the actor. You're on stage. The director, God, gave you a role. Maybe you're the king. Maybe you're the beggar. It doesn't matter. Your job isn't to choose the role. Your job is to play it well. If you're a beggar, be the best damn beggar the stage has ever seen.
And finally, the open door. He was dark, but he was practical. He told them, look, life is like a banquet. Take a polite share. But if the room gets too smoky, if the party is intolerable, you can leave. The door is always open. So if you stay, and you are staying, stop complaining. You chose to be here, so play the role.
So here's the thing, the awkward truth. We spend all this time quoting Epictetus. We put his face on coffee mugs. We tweet his zingers about control and freedom. But here is the kicker. Epictetus, the guy didn't write a single word. Not one. Zip, zero, nada. If it were up to him, his philosophy would have died the moment he took his last breath in Nicopolis. He was too busy actually living the philosophy to bother writing a book about it. Classic move, right? Socrates did it. Jesus did it. Apparently, if you're truly enlightened, you don't have time for a publishing deal. So why do we even know his name?
Enter Flavius Arrianus, or as I like to call him, the world's most overqualified stenographer. Arrian wasn't just some random fanboy in the front row. The guy was a serious player, a Roman historian, a public servant, a military commander. Later on, he literally governed Cappadocia and fought off the Alans. This was a man with a day job, a very serious, sword-wielding day job. But around 108 AD, he's just a young guy sitting in a classroom in Nicopolis, Greece, absolutely mesmerized by this crippled ex-slave teacher. People called Arrian the new Xenophon. If you skipped Philosophy 101, Xenophon was the guy who followed Socrates around and wrote down what he said, because Socrates was too busy annoying Athenians to do it himself. Arrian looked at Epictetus and thought, okay, this is my Socrates. I need to capture this. And thank the gods he did. But you have to understand how he did it. This wasn't a lecture hall where the professor reads off a teleprompter and shares the slides later. This was chaos. Epictetus was known for being intense. He'd yell, he'd roast students. He was impromptu, conversational, and frankly, a bit of a bully when he needed to be. He wasn't lecturing. He was dissecting people's souls in real time. Arrian is sitting there, probably sweating, frantically using a form of shorthand, stenography, to keep up. He wasn't trying to write a polished book. He was trying to capture the voice. You know when you listen to a recording of a conversation and it's messy? People interrupt each other, they use slang, the grammar is terrible? That's what Arrian was writing down. He calls these notes hyponemata, roughly translated, memory aids or rough notes. They were meant for him, just for him, to help him remember the time his teacher yelled at him for caring too much about his hair. In fact, there's this letter Arrian wrote to his friend Lucius Gellius. It's basically the preface to the works we have today, and it is a masterpiece of, oops, sorry. He basically says, hey, I didn't mean for these to get out. He claims they were unauthorized releases. He says, I didn't write these for the public. I just wanted to preserve the stinging saltiness of the old man's voice. Now, is that true? Or was it a humble brag? Oh no, my unfinished masterpiece accidentally got leaked to the publisher. How terrible. We don't know. But because he didn't try to polish it, because he didn't turn Epictetus into a boring academic writer, we get the real deal. We get the coiny Greek dialect. We get the insults. We get the raw, unpolished, confrontational style that makes Epictetus, well, Epictetus. So what do we actually have? We have two main things, thanks to our boy Arrian. First, the Discourses, or diatribi, Shakespeare. We have books 1 through 4, and they are the deep cuts. They are the long, winding arguments where Epictetus grabs you by the collar and doesn't let go. But Arrian knew that most people are lazy. He knew that even back then, people had short attention spans. So he did something brilliant. He took the Discourses, pulled out the punchiest one-liners, the sharpest rules, and the most practical tools, and he compiled them into a little pamphlet. He called it the Enchiridion. The word literally means a small thing held in the hand, a dagger, or a handbook. The Discourses were the classroom debates. The Enchiridion was the soldier's manual. It was the thing you kept in your pocket when life started throwing spears at you. It's concise, it's direct, it's the greatest hits album. Scholars love to argue about this, of course. They sit around debating how much of this is Arrian and how much is Epictetus. Did Arrian invent some of this? Honest answer? Who cares? The voice is consistent. The intensity is unique. If Arrian made it up, then Arrian is the greatest philosopher who ever lived. But the evidence points to it being a transcript. It feels oral. It loops, it repeats, it punches. It doesn't read like a book written by a guy trying to sound smart. It reads like a guy trying to wake you up. So here we are, 2,000 years later. We don't have scrolls anymore. We have Kindles.
We lost half the library, but because one guy in the back of the class decided to take furious notes instead of just nodding along, we have the manual for a good life. We owe Arrian a drink. Here is the weirdest part of this whole story. Usually, when a new religion takes over an empire, they burn the old manuals, they tear down the statues, they cancel the previous administration. But the early Christians, they didn't cancel Epictetus. They actually kind of fanboyed over him. It makes no sense on paper. You have this lame, crippled pagan philosopher talking about Zeus. He should have been enemy number one, but he wasn't. In fact, if you walked into a monastery in the 4th or 5th century, you'd probably find a well-thumbed copy of Epictetus right next to the Bible.
Why? Because Epictetus accidentally wrote the perfect prequel to Christianity. See, unlike the other Stoics who were obsessed with cosmic fire and dry physics, boring stuff, honestly, Epictetus made it personal. He stopped talking about the universe as a cold machine and started talking about a benevolent father, a God who cares, a God who watches. He talked about the anima naturaliter Christiana, the soul that is naturally Christian. He didn't use those words, obviously, but the vibe was there. Think about it. He preached about the will of God. He ranted about the brotherhood of man, that we are all children of the same Father. He even redefined sin. To him, sin wasn't just breaking a rule. It was hamartia, missing the mark, ignorance. Sound familiar? It should. Early church fathers like Justin Martyr looked at this and said, okay, wait, this guy isn't a pagan. He just hasn't met Jesus yet. They saw the seeds of the Logos in his ethics. And it goes deeper. Epictetus had this obsession with the ideal cynic, a messenger sent from Zeus, homeless, beaten, mocked, possessing nothing but his virtue. A man whose job was to suffer for the sake of others and rebuke sinners with love, not anger. To a Christian reading that in the 2nd century, that's not a philosopher, that's an apostle, that's a saint. Origen, a heavy hitter, hit early theology, even threw shade at Plato. He basically said, look, Plato is for the snobs in the ivory tower, but Epictetus, he actually changes regular people's lives. That is high praise. It got to the point where they literally plagiarized him. I'm not joking. There was a monk, St. Nilus. He took Epictetus's Enchiridion, the handbook, and he gave it a Christian patch update. He went through the text line by line. Wherever Epictetus wrote Socrates, Nilus backspaced and wrote St. Paul. Wherever Epictetus wrote Zeus, Nilus swapped in God. They used his book as a training manual for monks. They called it Askesis, spiritual athletics. Because if you're trying to live in a cave and not think about sex or cheeseburgers, you need mental toughness. And nobody taught mental toughness better than our guy Epictetus. But, and there is always a but, the bromance had limits. There were 2 massive deal breakers where the church had to draw a line in the sand. The first was the ego, the do-it-yourself attitude. Epictetus is all about autarkia, self-sufficiency. He says, you have the power. You can fix you. Just use your will. Christians say, actually, no. You're broken. You can't fix you. You need grace. You need help. This actually turned into a massive fight called the Pelagian controversy. Pelagius was this British monk who read a little too much Stoicism and started telling people they could be perfect without God's help. The church crushed that idea hard. The second deal breaker? The open door. Epictetus was surprisingly chill about it. He had this policy: if the room gets too smoky, leave. If life becomes unbearable, the door is open. You can check out. So the influence stopped at the edge of the cliff. But for a few hundred years, Epictetus was the pagan saint. He was the bridge. He taught the ancient world how to be disciplined enough to become Christian. And then, the Dark Ages hit. The manuscripts were locked away in dusty towers. The pagan saint went to sleep. But don't worry, he wakes up again in the Renaissance, and boy, does he wake up grumpy.
You know, history loves a good paradox. It thrives on irony. And frankly, there is no greater irony in the history of Western thought than the relationship between Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. Think about it. On one side, you have Epictetus, born a slave, lame leg, walking with a crutch, a man who owned nothing, literally nothing, not even his own body for half his life. On the other side, Marcus Aurelius, the last of the 5 good emperors, the most powerful man on the face of the earth, a guy who could snap his fingers and have a continent burn down. He slept in purple silk. Epictetus slept on straw. And yet, the emperor was the fanboy. I'm serious. Marcus was Epictetus's biggest hype man. Now, people always ask me, did they meet? It's a nice thought, right? The old sage and the young prince sitting in a garden, drinking wine, discussing the nature of the soul. It's cinematic. But no, almost certainly not. The timeline just doesn't work. Epictetus was banished from Rome by Domitian, who was, let's be honest, a paranoid nightmare of a human being, around 93 AD. Marcus wasn't even born until 121 AD. By the time Marcus was old enough to ask deep questions, Epictetus was either dead or very, very close to it, tucked away in Nicopolis. So they never shook hands, but they shared a brain. How? Enter Junius Rusticus. Rusticus was Marcus's tutor, a serious guy, very stoic. And he did the most important thing any teacher can do for a student. He didn't just teach him, he gave him a book. In Book 1 of Meditations, which, by the way, was just Marcus's personal diary, he never meant for us to read it, which makes us all voyeurs, technically. Marcus thanks Rusticus specifically. He says Rusticus loaned him his own copy of Epictetus's notes. That's huge. Back then, you didn't just hop on Amazon. A copy of the Discourses was a treasure. Rusticus handing that over was like handing over the nuclear launch codes for mental resilience. And once Marcus read it, he was hooked. He was obsessed. If you read Meditations closely, you can see Epictetus's fingerprints all over the crime scene. Sometimes Marcus quotes him directly. There's this one line, arguably the best line in Stoicism. You are a little soul carrying around a corpse. That's Epictetus. That is vintage Epictetus. Blunt, gross, accurate. Marcus wrote that down to remind himself not to get too puffed up about being, the emperor of Rome. Hey, don't get cocky. You're just a ghost hauling around a dying meat sack. Humbles you pretty quick. But it wasn't just quotes. It was the training, the discipline. Scholars like Pierre Hadot talk about these 3 disciplines: desire, action, assent. Fancy words. But for Marcus, this wasn't academic. It was survival. Epictetus taught that we have to strictly control what we desire. If you desire things you can't control, like fame or health or people liking you, you're going to be miserable, guaranteed. Marcus took this and built what he called an inner citadel. Epictetus yelled about the invincible will. He was aggressive about it. He'd say, "You can chain my leg, but not even Zeus can conquer my will." He was a fighter. Marcus was softer, sadder. He internalized it. He retreated into this fortress inside his mind. He realized that while he couldn't control the Germanic tribes attacking the borders, or the plague killing his citizens, or his wife maybe possibly cheating on him, he could control his judgment of it. And we see this play out in real time.
This is where it gets cool. There was a guy named Avidius Cassius, a general, a friend. He started a rebellion. He declared himself emperor while Marcus was sick. It was a betrayal of the highest order. Standard Roman operating procedure? Kill him. Kill his family, kill his friends, burn his house, salt the earth. But Marcus? He goes full Epictetus. He didn't panic. He didn't rage. He looked at the situation through that discipline of ascent. He told his troops, "We are going to march against him, but we are not going to kill him. We are going to forgive him." He wanted to show the world that reason conquers anger. He literally saw this betrayal not as a personal attack, but as someone else making a mistake, an error in judgment. As Epictetus would say, if he does wrong, the evil is his own. Cassius was killed by his own men before Marcus got there, and Marcus famously wept. He cried because he lost the chance to turn an enemy into a friend. That is the dichotomy of control in action. That is ruling the world without letting the world rule you. And that's why this connection matters. Because if Stoicism was just for slaves, we'd say, well, of course Epictetus liked it. It was a coping mechanism for being poor and oppressed. And if it was just for emperors, we'd say, easy for you to say, you're rich. But here we have the two extremes, the guy in chains and the guy in the palace, and they both used the exact same toolset to survive. They sound different, sure. Epictetus is the coach screaming at you to do one more rep. He's funny, he's sharp, he's biting. Marcus is the somber friend sitting next to you in the dark, whispering that it's gonna be okay. Epictetus talks to a classroom. Marcus talks to himself. But the message is identical. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you're stuck in traffic, stuck in a cubicle, or stuck running an empire. The external stuff, the chains or the purple robes, it's just costume. The mind, the ruling faculty, that's yours. That's the only thing that's ever been yours. And Marcus knew that because a crippled slave taught him how to be a king. I know. History of philosophy. You're already reaching for the skip button. You're thinking, I came here to fix my life, not to learn about dead Greeks and togas. Don't do it. Stick with me for 5 minutes. Because if you don't understand where this stuff came from, you won't understand why Epictetus is such a weirdo. And he is a weirdo. He's the punk rock singer in a choir of classical musicians. To get why he's yelling at us, we have to look at the polite conversation he interrupted. See, Stoicism wasn't always this gritty, embrace the suck manual for Navy SEALs and tech bros. It started way more nerdy. It kicks off around 300 BC with Zeno of Citium. Poor guy gets shipwrecked, loses all his purple dye, which was worth a fortune by the way, and washes up in Athens. He wanders into a bookstore, reads some Socrates, and decides, okay, I'm doing this. He sets up shop on a painted porch. That's all Stoa means, a porch. If he taught in a basement, we'd be called ascetics right now. But early Stoicism, it was dense. They had this metaphor of the egg. Logic was the shell, physics was the egg white, and ethics, the part about how to actually live, was the yolk. You needed all three. You had guys like Chrysippus, the second founder. Brilliant guy. Wrote over 700 books. We have basically none of them left, which is a tragedy. Or maybe a blessing, because the man was obsessed with logic puzzles and grammar. If you were a Stoic back then, you were studying meteorology. You were studying how sentences are formed. You were trying to figure out if the universe was a living fire. It was a theory of everything. Then the Romans got hold of it. Now, Romans, they didn't care about the egg white or the shell. They wanted the yolk. They were engineers, soldiers, politicians. They asked, does this help me run the Senate? Does this stop me from trembling before battle? This is where we get the middle Stoa. They started softening the edges, making it palatable for the elites. And that leads us to the big celebrity before Epictetus, Seneca. I love Seneca, but let's be real. Seneca was the guy writing beautiful essays about poverty while sitting on a table made of citrus wood that cost more than most people's houses. He was in the imperial court. He was tutoring Nero. Yes, that Nero. Seneca is the polished literary uncle of Stoicism.
He wrote letters. He wrote plays. He was trying to reconcile power with philosophy. It feels safe. It feels like literature. Then enters Musonius Rufus. This guy is the bridge. They called him the Roman Socrates. He wasn't writing pretty letters. He was getting exiled.
He was distinct because he preached that philosophy was daily practice. He talked about diet. He talked about marriage. He was one of the first to say loudly that women had the exact same capacity for virtue as men. Radical stuff. And sitting in his classroom, probably with a broken leg and a chip on his shoulder, was a slave named Epictetus. This is the pivot. This is where everything changes.
When Epictetus finally gets his freedom and starts his own school in Nicopolis, he doesn't just continue the tradition. He grabbed Stoicism by the throat and shakes the fluff out of it. He looked at all that complex logic, the physics, the is the universe a fire stuff, and he said, who cares? Okay, he didn't say who cares. He said logic is only useful if it keeps you from lying to yourself. He narrowed the scope. He took that egg, cracked it, threw away the shell, drained the white, and served us the yolk raw. He introduced the absolute weapon, the dichotomy of control. Before him, it was there, implied, floating around. Epictetus made it the dogma. Some things are up to us, some things are not. If it's not up to you, it's nothing to you. End of lecture. He moved the battlefield. The early Stoics talked about the cosmic city, how we are all citizens of the world. Nice thought. Epictetus talked about the inner citadel. He was obsessed with prohairesis. That's your moral will, your capacity to choose. He realized that you can be a slave in chains, like he was, and still be free if your prohairesis is untouchable. He changed the vibe of the room. Going to hear Seneca would have been like going to a TED Talk. Inspiring, witty, you'd leave feeling smart. Going to Epictetus, he tells us straight up, the philosopher's school is a hospital, not a lecture hall. You should leave in pain, not in pleasure. He wasn't trying to entertain his students. He was trying to cure them. He yelled at them, he mocked them, he mimicked their whining voices. Oh, I have a headache. Oh, Caesar doesn't like me. He was raw. He didn't write anything down because he was too busy doing the Socratic work of cornering people in conversation and forcing them to admit they were idiots. We only have his words because a student, Arrian, sat in the corner and took notes, stenography. That's why the discourses feel so disjointed and punchy. It's not a book. It's a transcript of a man shouting at you to get your act together. So, what happened after the hospital closed? The legacy is ironic. The greatest student of this former slave was the most powerful man on earth, Marcus Aurelius. Think about that. You have Epictetus, who owned nothing, not even his own body for half his life. And you have Marcus, who owned the known world. And yet, when you read Marcus's meditations, he sounds exactly like Epictetus. He's quoting him. He's using the same exercises. The slave taught the emperor that power doesn't matter. Only the mind matters. After Marcus, things go dark for a while. The Christians pick it up, ironically. They loved the Enchiridion, the handbook. They just did a find and replace, swapped Socrates for St. Paul, and used it to train monks. It turns out denying your impulses works pretty well, whether you're a Stoic or a monk. But the real explosion, the one that saved my life and might save yours, that's modern. It's James Stockdale,
a fighter pilot shot down over Vietnam. He spent 7 years in the Hanoi Hilton. Torture, isolation, leg irons. And he said the only thing that kept him sane wasn't hope, and it wasn't politics. It was Epictetus. He had memorized the Enchiridion. When his captors broke his leg, he thought, I control my will. I do not control my leg. It was a survival manual. And finally, it hit psychology. In the 1950s, guys like Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck looked at Freud and said, this is taking too long. They looked at Epictetus. They saw the core idea. It is not events that disturb us, but our judgments about events. Boom. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is born. If you've ever been to therapy, you've done Stoicism. You just paid $200 an hour for it. So when we read Epictetus today, we aren't doing history. We are looking at the source code for mental resilience. He stripped the philosophy down to its chassis so it could survive the crash. And trust me, life is going to crash. Now that we know who this guy is and why he's yelling, we need to look at the tool he gave us, the big one, the one that solves 99% of your problems. Let's talk about the dichotomy of control. So, let's talk about the leg. You can't really picture Epictetus without the crutch, right? The limp, the frailty. It's central to the whole brand. If you saw a statue of the guy standing tall with perfect posture and shredded quads, you'd walk right past it. That's not him. But how did he get that way? This is where things get murky and a little bit cinematic. There are basically two versions of this story. One is an action movie, and the other is, well, a medical file. Let's start with the torture narrative, because let's be honest, it's the one we all want to believe. It comes from Celsus, and it paints Epictetus as the ultimate badass in the face of pure, unadulterated evil. Here's the scene. Epictetus is a slave. His master is this guy named Epaphroditus. Now, Epaphroditus wasn't just a bad boss who emails you at 10 p.m. He was a piece of work, cruel, violent, probably deeply insecure. The dynamic is classic. The powerful, unhinged master versus the powerless, calm slave. So for some reason, maybe he was bored, maybe he was trying to extract a confession, maybe he just didn't like the look on Epictetus's face. Epaphroditus decides to grab Epictetus's leg, and he starts twisting it, just cranking it. Now, most of us, we're screaming, we're begging, we're giving up the nuclear launch codes. Epictetus, he just looks at him, totally deadpan, and he says calmly, if you keep twisting it, it will break. Not a threat, not a plea, just a statement of fact, like he's commenting on the weather. Looks like rain. Looks like my femur is about to snap.
Epaphroditus, being a psychopath, keeps twisting. Crack. The bone snaps. And this is the moment. This is the mic drop of ancient philosophy. Epictetus doesn't scream. He doesn't cry out. He just looks at the dangling limb, then back at his master, and says, "Did I not tell you it would break?" I mean, come on, that is cold. That is ice cold. It's the ultimate proof of concept. It's him saying, you can crush the bone, but you can't touch me. The leg is just meat. The will is untouchable. It's a great story. It makes you want to go out and stare down a tank. But then there's the other version, the natural causes version. Historians like Simplicius and Suidas suggest something way less dramatic. Rheumatism, or maybe just a congenital defect. Maybe he was just a sickly kid who grew up into a sickly man. No torture, no evil villain, just bad genetics and a lack of modern calcium supplements. Epictetus himself mentions being a man of feeble body pretty often. He calls himself a lame old man. It's entirely possible his leg wasn't broken by a tyrant, it was just broken by life.
by biology. Which version is true? Honestly, it doesn't matter. I know, you want the torture story to be true because it's heroic. But think about it. If it was just rheumatism, isn't that almost more relatable? We don't all have evil masters twisting our limbs, but we all have bodies that fail us, knees that pop, backs that ache, sickness, age. Whether it was malice or nature, the result was the same. The man was broken. And this brings us to the core of his teaching, the adiaphora, the indifference.
Epictetus didn't look at his leg and say, "Oh, woe is me, my life is ruined." He looked at it and categorized it. He drew a line in the sand. On one side, things that are up to us, prohairesis, our will, our choices, our judgments. On the other side, things that are not up to us, our bodies, our reputation, our property. His leg, that was firmly in the not up to us pile. He has this line in the Discourses that hits you like a truck.
He says, lameness is an impediment to the leg, but not to the will. Read that again. The leg has a problem. I do not have a problem. He separated himself from his meat suit. To him, the limp was just an external circumstance. It was like wearing a shirt that's too tight. Annoying? Maybe. But does it change who you are? No.
This is why he's the lame sage. The disability wasn't a bug, it was a feature. It was part of the lesson plan. In antiquity, people were obsessed with beauty. Physical perfection was seen as a sign of divine favor. Then here comes Epictetus, limping, probably using a crutch, wearing rough clothes. He looked like a beggar, but when he opened his mouth, king.
So let's talk about how this guy actually lived. Because it's easy to sit in a coffee shop with a $6 latte, scrolling through quotes on Instagram and think, yeah, I'm pretty stoic. But Epictetus, he wasn't just posting about it, he was walking the walk. And honestly, the way he lived makes me look like a pampered toddler. It probably makes you look like one too, no offense. He sets up shop in Nicopolis. Now, imagine the most famous philosopher in the world. You're probably picturing a tenure-track professor's office, mahogany desk, maybe a nice view of the ocean. Epictetus lived in a shack. And I don't mean a tiny home with cute minimalist aesthetics and hidden storage. I mean a room, a rush mat to sleep on, a straw mat. That's it. That was the inventory. And get this, he didn't lock his door. He didn't have a guard. He just existed. For the vast majority of his life, he lived completely alone. Just an old man, a lame leg, and a brain that could dismantle your entire worldview in 5 minutes. But here is where it gets good, the lamp. You see, Epictetus had one luxury, and I use that word loosely. He had an iron lamp. It was what he used to read and write his lectures. It was his tool. And because it was iron, it had a little value. Not much, but enough. So one night, he's sitting there, or maybe he's asleep on his terrible straw mat, and he hears a noise. Someone's in the house. Now, if someone breaks into my house, I'm panicking. I'm grabbing a baseball bat, I'm calling the cops, I'm screaming. Epictetus hears the rustling. He realizes what's happening. The thief grabs the iron lamp and runs off into the night. Epictetus doesn't chase him. He doesn't shake his fist at the sky. He doesn't post a rant on the town square notice board. He just sits there. And the next day, he tells his students about it. And this is the part that always floors me. He doesn't say, that jerk stole my stuff. He says, he bought it for a very high price. Pause on that. He says the thief paid a high price. What price? The lamp was free, right? The thief stole it. Epictetus says, for a lamp he became a thief. For a lamp he became faithless. For a lamp he became a wild beast.
That is such a savage burn, but it's also compassionate. He looked at this guy who just ripped him off and thought, wow, you traded your integrity for a piece of metal? Bad trade, buddy. You got ripped off. The thief got a lamp. The thief lost his character. Epictetus lost a lamp, but he kept his peace. Who really won? So what does he do? He needs to read, right? He doesn't go buy a security system. He goes to the market and buys a cheap clay lamp, the kind that breaks if you look at it wrong. And he says to himself, if the thief comes back, he'll find a clay one, and he won't want it. He didn't upgrade his security, he downgraded his possessions. He realized that his anxiety about losing stuff was tied to the value of the stuff. Reduce the value, remove the anxiety. It's genius. It's annoying how right he is, but it's genius. But wait, history has a sense of humor, and it's a dark one.
After Epictetus dies, his fame explodes. He's the guy. Everyone wants a piece of the sage of Nicopolis. So they hold an auction for his stuff, which, remember, is basically garbage. Lucian, a satirist from back then, think of him as the stand-up comedian of the ancient world, tells us that a rich collector bought that cheap clay lamp. Guess how much he paid? 3,000 drachmae.
That is an absurd amount of money. That's like buying a used Bic lighter for 50 grand. Why? Because the buyer thought, and I'm not making this up, that if he read by the light of Epictetus's lamp, he would absorb the old man's wisdom, like it was radioactive, like he could catch smart through osmosis. It's hilarious and tragic, the exact opposite of what Epictetus taught.
The guy tried to buy wisdom with money, proving he had absolutely no idea what Epictetus was talking about. You can't buy the software by overpaying for the hardware. But let's get a little more physical, because it wasn't just about lamps, it was about pain. There's this story about his leg. Now, historians fight about this. Some say it was rheumatism, some say torture, but the story that has survived, the one that defines the myth of Epictetus, is the torture story. And we're telling stories here, so let's go with that.
Back when he was a slave, his master, Epaphroditus, who was a real piece of work, by the way, was angry. He decides to twist Epictetus's leg, just cranking it. Epictetus isn't screaming. He isn't begging. He's looking at his master calmly and says, if you keep doing that, you will break it. Just a fact. Like stating the weather. It's going to rain today.
The master gets madder. He twists harder. Snap. Epictetus looks down at his mangled leg, looks back at the master, and says, "Did I not tell you that you would break it?" I mean, come on, who is this guy? He lived the rest of his life with a limp. Every step was a reminder of slavery. Every step was pain. But he treated his body like we treat a rental car.
Oh, the bumper fell off. That's inconvenient. But I'm not the car. I'm the driver. He viewed his body as an external. It wasn't him. He was his will. He was his choices. The leg was just meat, and meat breaks. He carried that same energy into how he looked. He wore a rough cloak. He didn't cut his hair. He had the philosopher's beard. Now, in Rome, the beard was a statement. It was a badge. It said, "I am opting out of your vanity games." Domitian, the emperor, a paranoid tyrant, real nasty guy, banned philosophers. He wanted them gone. He told them to shave their beards or face death. Most shaved. Epictetus, he said, "I will not shave it." Someone asked, "But what if he kills you?" Epictetus basically shrugged. "Then I will die. I never said I was immortal, but I will die wearing my beard." He was willing to lose his life over facial hair? No. He was willing to lose his life over integrity. The beard was just the symbol. If he shaved because he was scared,
He was admitting the emperor had power over his mind, and that was the one thing Epictetus would never allow. But, and I love this part because it ruins the caricature, he wasn't a robot. If you stop reading there, you think he's this cold, unfeeling stone statue. Break my leg, steal my lamp, kill me, I don't care. But late in his life, something happened. Epictetus, the guy who loved solitude, the guy who lived on a mat, found out that a friend of his was going to expose a baby. In ancient Rome, if you couldn't afford a kid or just didn't want it, you left it outside to die. It was common. It was legal. It was horrible. Epictetus, this old limping bachelor, hears about this, and he breaks his own rules. He takes the baby. He brings the kid into a shack, and suddenly the simplicity is gone. Babies are not simple. Babies are loud, messy, and needy. He realizes he can't do it alone, so he hires a nurse to live with him to help raise the child. He gave up his precious solitude. He gave up his quiet. He gave up his routine. Why? Because being a Stoic doesn't mean being a heartless monster. It means doing the right thing. And letting a baby die because you want peace and quiet, that's not virtue. That's just selfishness dressed up as philosophy. He endured the broken leg for himself, but he broke his solitude for someone else. And I think that's the most impressive thing about him. He was tough as nails when it came to his own suffering, but soft when it came to the suffering of an innocent. That is the balance. That is the man. Look, I get it. We're busy. We have jobs, we have debt, we have a tiny supercomputer in our pockets screaming for attention every 12 seconds. So why should you care about a guy who died almost 2,000 years ago? A guy who didn't write a single book? A guy who, and let's be honest here, was a slave with a crippled leg? Because he figured it out. The code, the cheat sheet. Epictetus isn't just some dusty bust in a museum. He is the grandfather of the mental health industry. You know cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT? The thing that saves millions of people from spiraling depression every year? Yeah, Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis, the guys who invented that, they basically just plagiarized Epictetus. Okay, maybe plagiarized is harsh. Heavily borrowed. See, Epictetus dropped this bombshell. Men are not disturbed by things, but by the view which they take of them. That's it. That's the tweet. It sounds simple, right? Almost too simple, like something you'd see on a cat poster in a dentist office. But think about it. It's not the traffic that makes you angry. It's your opinion that traffic shouldn't exist right now. It's not the insult that hurts. It's your belief that the other person's opinion actually matters. You are the architect of your own misery. Congratulations. And this matters today more than ever because we are drowning in anxiety. We are control freaks in a world that is fundamentally uncontrollable. We stress about the election. We stress about interest rates. We stress about what some stranger in a comment section said about our haircut. Epictetus would look at us and laugh, not in a mean way. Well, maybe a little mean. He'd say we're trying to play God. He drew a line in the sand, the dichotomy of control. On one side, things up to us, our opinions, our aims, our desires. On the other side, everything else. The economy, the weather, your reputation, your body even. If you try to control the everything else, you lose. You become a slave. And speaking of slavery, let's talk about that phone in your hand. We think we're free because we can order sushi at 3 a.m. But are we? Epictetus warned us about outsourcing our happiness. He said if your peace of mind depends on someone else admiring you, you're their property. Every time you post a photo and check for likes, you're handing the keys to your happiness to a bunch of strangers on the internet. You're asking the world, am I good enough yet? And the algorithm whispers, no, keep scrolling. Epictetus calls this the discipline of ascent.
It's the art of hitting the pause button. When you see a clickbait headline designed to make you furious, or a picture designed to make you jealous, you stop. You don't react. You test the impression. You say, wait, is this actually bad, or is it just information?
Without this filter, you're just a puppet, and the world is pulling the strings. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds nice, old man, but real life is hard. Real tragedy happens. You're right, it does. And that's why we need to talk about Admiral James Stockdale.
This guy was a fighter pilot in Vietnam, shot down, captured. He spent 7 years in the Hanoi Hilton POW camp. Torture, solitary confinement, iron shackles, the works. And when he ejected from his plane, knowing his life was over, he whispered to himself, I'm leaving the world of technology and entering the world of Epictetus.
He survived because he didn't just read the philosophy, he used it. He practiced the Stockdale paradox. He accepted the brutal reality of his situation. He didn't lie to himself and say, I'll be out by Christmas. That's false hope. That breaks you. But he never lost the faith that he would prevail in the end. He focused only on what he could control, his dignity, his resistance, his mind. That is the open door, the idea that they can take your leg, your money, your freedom, even your life, but they cannot touch your will unless you let them.
So here's the rub. Most of us treat philosophy like a fashion accessory. We memorize a few cool quotes to sound smart at dinner parties. We're like sheep who vomit up the grass to show the shepherd how much we've eaten. Epictetus hated that. He said, don't vomit the grass, digest it, and show me the wool. Don't tell me you've read the books. Show me you've changed. Show me you're less angry. Show me you're less afraid. Show me that when the world catches fire, you don't burn with it. That is why he matters, not because he was a philosopher, but because he showed us how to be free.